Chapter 1. In the 10 Directions Celestial Domain, there were 10 levels of talent, and each level was a vast world. The 10 Directions Celestial Domain advocated martial arts cultivation. From the first Celestial Domain to the 10th Celestial Domain, each Celestial Domain was connected by a space-time portal. Only those with enough strength could enter the next Celestial Domain and reach a higher level. Legend had it that the 10th Celestial Domain contained a shocking secret. As long as one could enter the 10th Celestial Domain, they could reach the state of eternal immortality and become the 10 Directions Divine King. Northern Flame Country, Fengjian City. The sky was a little dark, and it looked like night was about to fall. Lin Tian was carrying a black iron sword. His clothes were tattered and soaked, mixed with blood and mud. There were streaks of blood on his delicate face. Even so, Lin Tian could not help but laugh. Ha ha ha, I'm back alive! Damn heavens, at least you still have some conscience. There were many pedestrians on the street. When they heard the voice, they all looked over with disdain. Crazy! His parents are missing and his family business is in ruins. Has he gone mad? Stay away from this jinx, don't get involved in any bad luck. The passers-by pointed and whispered among themselves. Lin Tian couldn't be bothered to deal with these people and walked in a certain direction. Lin Tian had transmigrated. He was originally an earthling, but 10 days ago, due to an accident, he had transmigrated to this foreign world and possessed the body of a young master. This young master, who had the same name as him, was not a disciple of a martial arts family, but his father was the richest businessman in Fengjian City. Lin Tian was speechless. After obtaining the memories of the original owner of this body, he realized that this young master was a little stupid. 2 years ago, when his parents went missing, this young master ignored the old housekeeper's objection and insisted that his fiancée, Xiao Yun, help him with the business. In the end, in 2 years, the family business was wiped clean, and he was killed by the Xiao family. It was also at that time that Lin Tian happened to cross over and possess this young master. What was even more depressing was that after his resurrection, he had finally accepted this strange world after more than 10 days. He walked out of the Lin family's old house for the first time, but he happened to bump into Xiao Yun and Emosen, who were flirting on the street. After a short moment of surprise, Emosen actually directly attacked him. As an ordinary person of 2 lifetimes, how could he be the opponent of Emosen, who was born in a martial arts family? In the blink of an eye, he was taken down by Emo's senator after being tied up outside the city and beaten. He was directly thrown off the cliff. Fortunately, there was a pool at the bottom of the cliff, so he barely managed to save his life. After trekking for a while, he walked back. This adulterous couple, I will definitely kill you! Lin Tian cursed fiercely. At this time, the sky was completely dark, and the air was a little cold. Lin Tian's clothes were already soaked through. He sneezed in the cold wind. As his shoulders shook, the purple bell at the end of the iron sword jingled. He picked up this iron sword in the cave under the cliff. It was the wind in the cave that blew the purple bell, allowing him to find the way back. I wonder how Lin Shi is, Lin Tian said to himself. He had a younger sister in this strange world. The little girl was called Lin Shi. She was very well behaved and sensible. In the past 10 days, because he had crossed over to this strange world, he had been very dispirited. Lin Shi had always been taking care of him. Thinking of Lin Shi, Lin Tian could not help but reveal a gentle smile. Enduring the cold and pain in his body, Lin Tian soon arrived in front of a bleak house. It was the Lin family's old house. I'm finally back. I've been out for so long. Lin Shi should be worried. Lin Tian chuckled. He stretched out his hands and pushed the door of the house. At this time, a frightened female voice came from the house, mixed with 2 lewd laughs, which suddenly made Lin Tian's face change. P.S. The start of the new book. First of all, I would like to thank all old and new friends for their support. Then, I'll have to trouble everyone to collect this book. The first month of the new book is very important. Friends with recommendation tickets, I implore everyone to vote for the God of 10 Directions. Long thanks everyone here. Thank you. Chapter 2. Lin Tianyi kicked open the door and rushed into the backyard following the sound. He saw Mo Sen's two servants, Ma Zi and Lu Er, tearing apart a little girl's clothes. The little girl was like a pear blossom in the rain. Most of her clothes were torn, revealing a lot of her skin. She had a frightened expression on her face. F***ck your ancestors! Lin Tianyi felt a surge of anger. He even forgot the pain in his body and swung his iron sword at Lu Er, who was slightly closer. The two people were shocked when they saw Lin Tian rushing over. Little bastard, you didn't die! You dared to come back after picking up a rotten life. Just right, let Grandpa Lu send you on your way again. Lu Er grinned and raised his fist to meet the attack. As Mo Sen's servant, Lu Er had never practiced martial arts, but his skills were not weak. He did not put Lin Tian in his eyes at all. The moment the fist and sword met, a strong force came from the sword and directly sent him flying. I didn't see that a little bastard like you has some ability. Ma Zi stared at Lin Tian and snorted contemptuously. But you're only at this level. I'll let you see Grandpa Ma's means before you die. Ma Zi took a small step back with his right leg and made a punching posture. In an instant, Ma Zi's momentum changed, as if he had turned into a fierce tiger. Brother Ma Zi has already touched the threshold of martial arts. One punch is enough to deal with a little bastard like you. Lu Er grinned and said, Little bastard, enjoy your last moments. Ma Zi was very pleased with Lu Er's compliment. He nodded proudly and then shouted coldly. He waved his palm, bringing a gust of wind with it, and blasted towards Lin Tian. Hey, killing you is also a great merit. Die. Dog slave! Lin Tian had long been angered beyond belief. When he saw Lin Shi's disheveled appearance, thinking about how this little girl took care of him in every possible way, he felt as if there was a raging flame burning in his chest. While holding his sword with both hands, he charged at Pockmarked crazily. The iron sword waved, and the purple bell at the end of the sword also swayed, but strangely, there was no sound. Lin Tian could no longer think about this. He only had eyes for Ma Zi, who was approaching him. His only thought now was to cut Ma Zi in half. Go to hell! Lin Tian's eyes were red. As his hands fell, the iron sword fiercely chopped down. Pooh! After a sound, Ma Zi's face was sluggish. He maintained his punching posture, but an arm was flying, with a dazzling bloody light. Then, his entire body split open from his shoulder. Blood spurted out, and he fell straight to the ground. With one slash, Pockmarked was sliced into two. Lu Er howled miserably. Pockmarked, who had already touched upon the threshold of the martial Tao, had actually been killed by a single strike from Lin Tian. This strange and terrifying scene terrified him to the point that his face turned pale. He didn't dare stay any longer and hurriedly fled. Lu Er's miserable howl shook Lin Tian, and he immediately sobered up. Brother! Brother! Just then, a sobbing voice sounded. Lin Shi's clothes were messy, and her face was full of fear. Lin Tianyi was shocked. He didn't care about Lu Er, who was running away, and quickly went to Lin Shi's side. He pulled a piece of cloth and covered Lin Shi's body. He was a little flustered. Seeing the little girl trembling in fear, Lin Tian's heart clenched. I'm sorry, Xiao Shi. I'm useless. I couldn't protect you. In the 10 days since he transmigrated, it was Lin Shi who took care of him. She washed his clothes and cooked for him. He had long regarded the little girl as his own sister. How could he feel good when he saw the little girl being hurt like this? Lin Shi was only 8 years old right now. The things those two dog servants did today, just how great of a shadow would they leave in Lin Shi's heart? Lin Tian felt as if his chest was about to explode. Even though he had killed Ma Zi, his eyes were still full of killing intent. Lin Shi trembled. Only after a long time did she recover from her fright. She grabbed Lin Tian's clothes and said while sobbing, They said that Big Brother died, but Little Shi didn't believe them. Big Brother wouldn't abandon Little Shi. Lin Tian felt a wave of sadness, continuously comforting her. Only when Lin Shi calmed down did he open his mouth again, saying, "Little Shi, come, leave this place with Big Brother." "Brother, why?" Lin Shi sniffled. Lin Tian forced a smile and said, "Nothing. Brother will take you out to see the stars." Of course, he didn't really want to take Lin Shi out to see the stars. Ma Zi was killed by him, but Lu Er escaped. He believed that Lu Er would tell Mo Sen and Xiao Yun that he was still alive. He had to take Lin Shi out to hide. "Oh, okay." Lin Shi was very obedient. Lin Tian quickly packed some clothes and dry food. Then he picked up Lin Shi, endured the pain in his body, and quickly left through the back door. After running for a short distance, he heard that someone had broken into the house and was rummaging through the cabinets, looking for something. This made his heart cold, and he quickened his pace. After running for a while, a wisp of fire lit up in the dark night. "Brother, fire! The house is on fire!" Lin Shi shouted. Lin Tian turned back. The house was burning fiercely, and it was extremely dazzling in the dark. He vaguely heard a voice full of hostility. "If you can't find it, burn it! Anyway, the Xiao family has almost swallowed up the Lin family. It doesn't make a difference to this abandoned house. Burn it and let those two little bastards live on the streets." Lin Tian's body trembled. He gritted his teeth and ran away with Lin Shi in his arms. In the dark, the fire burned fiercely, and there was a sizzling sound. Lin Shi cried anxiously. She struggled in Lin Tian's arms, her little hands grasping the air. She cried until her liver was broken. This house was the only thing left by her parents. Lin Tian firmly imprisoned Lin Shi in his chest. He endured the pain in his body and ran away with big strides. There was a green mountain outside Fengjian City. Lin Tianyi ran into the mountain and stopped. Lin Shi was lying on his chest. After being frightened, and then feeling too much grief, he already fainted. While fainting, his small body was still shaking, as if he was having some type of terrifying nightmare, making Lin Tian feel a wave of heartache. He raised his head and looked at the fierce fire in the dark. His hands were tightly clenched. This was too much. Chapter 3. The air in the mountains was very humid. Lin Tian did not dare to light a fire, for fear that the Xiao and Mo families would notice. He held Lin Shi and leaned against a thick tree trunk, looking at the raging fire in the darkness in the distance. His eyes were very frightening. Waves of pain came from his body, and drowsiness came over him. Not long after, Lin Tian fell into a deep sleep. Leaning against a thick tree trunk, Lin Tian had a dream. In the dream, he was standing in the vast sky. Looking into the distance, he saw 9 hazy figures standing in front of him. In the middle of the 9 figures, a long sword was suspended, shining brightly. Suddenly, the 9 figures moved, grabbing at the sword in the middle. Lin Tian opened his eyes wide. At this moment, the 9 figures were fighting. He saw the sky collapse and the earth sink. Bolts of lightning struck down, and beams of divine light rushed up. It was as if the world was about to be destroyed. After that, the scene changed again. He saw a long sword falling from the sky, passing through layers of blurry barriers, and rushing straight towards him. "Oh my God!" Lin Tian shouted. He opened his eyes abruptly, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. The night was still dark. He was still leaning against the thick tree trunk behind him. Lin Shi was lying in his arms. Perhaps because she was too sad, she was not awakened by his shout. Lin Tian wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. The dream just now was too frightening. The scene of the long sword flying towards him was too realistic. He exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Then, he was shocked. Sword? Where was the sword in his hand? He remembered that when he was holding Lin Shi, the iron sword was in his right hand. But now, it was gone. Thinking about the dream just now, Lin Tian broke out in a cold sweat. He looked around and suddenly realized that his palm was emitting a dim light. He put his right hand in front of his eyes. Suddenly his pupils shook. At this moment, there was a sword mark on his palm. The appearance of this sword mark was exactly the same as the iron sword he picked up at the bottom of the cliff. This? Lin Tian's pupils constricted. At this moment, a sharp pain assaulted his mind. Lin Tianji felt as if a heavy hammer had struck his head. The heart-wrenching pain made him want to scream out loud. However, this pain did not last for long and quickly dissipated. Lin Tian's entire body was drenched in sweat. Then, he was shocked again. At this moment, many mysterious and complicated things suddenly appeared in his mind. Talismans, divine patterns, Tao seals, all kinds of strange lights flickered, gorgeous and dazzling. In the end, an obscure ancient scripture poured into his mind and rang out in his mind. Lin Tian was shocked. What was this? Cultivation method? This thought shook Lin Tian's heart. He had absorbed all the memories of this body and knew that the world he was in now was a country that advocated martial arts. Martial arts was cultivation, and it was the dream of all young people. Every year, countless people wanted to embark on the path of martial arts. However, cultivation required a cultivation method. This kind of cultivation method was very difficult to obtain. Ordinary small aristocratic families would not have it. In the Northern Flame country, most of the powerful cultivation methods were in the hands of the empire. For example, in the huge city and its surroundings, only the Northern Flame country's 9 young martial house and a few martial arts families had cultivation methods. However, the cultivation methods of ordinary martial arts families were very ordinary, and could not be compared to those of the 9 young martial house. Moreover, martial arts families would not pass down their cultivation methods to outsiders. Therefore, every year, countless hot-blooded youths who were determined to pursue martial arts rushed to the 9 young martial house, hoping to become a disciple of the martial house. From there, they could learn powerful cultivation methods and truly embark on the path of cultivation. Lin Tian was not a descendant of a martial arts family, and had never joined the 9 young martial house. However, now that he might have obtained a cultivation method, how could he not be shocked? Taking a deep breath, Lin Tian quickly sorted out the information in his mind. After 2 hours, his eyes lit up. He had indeed sorted out a complete set of cultivation methods. Body tempering divine art, for extreme scriptures. P.S. Thank you, Brother Hu, for your 30,000 traversing coins support. Thank you, Demon Emperor, for your 10,000 traversing coins support. Chapter 4. In martial arts, the body refinement realm was the entry level. This realm mainly focused on refining the flesh and bones. Even without a cultivation technique, an average person could cultivate on their own. However, without a cultivation technique, an average person could only reach the 5th level of the body refinement realm. After that, it was almost impossible for them to advance. Because of this, cultivation techniques were extremely precious. Lin Tian calmed his heart and began to comprehend the 4 extremes scripture. The more he read, the more shocked he was. Generally speaking, an average cultivation technique could only be cultivated up to the 9th level of the body refinement realm. However, the 4 extremes scripture could be cultivated endlessly, constantly strengthening the body. There was no end. It was simply a top-level cultivation technique. Lin Tian even believed that in the entire Northern Flame country, there was no other cultivation technique that could compare to the 4 extremes scripture. Lin Tian's eyes were filled with determination. He couldn't help but clench his fists. With the 4 extremes scripture, he could truly embark on the path of cultivation. Martial arts, cultivation, this world is really exciting, Lin Tian muttered to himself. This was the first time he came into contact with cultivation. To be honest, Lin Tian was a little excited and incredulous. However, as a person who had lived 2 lives, his state of mind was much higher than that of an average person. He quickly calmed down. He lowered his head to look at the little girl sleeping soundly in his arms. He tilted his head to look at the already weak flame in the darkness. His eyes flashed with a strange light. Amosen, Xiaoyun, wait for me! He clenched his fists. The moonlight was like water. A faint silver light scattered over the earth. Lin Tian leaned against a thick tree trunk. He glanced at the sleeping Lin Shi. He closed his eyes and began to breathe at a special frequency. Looking from afar, the starlight condensed into strands and entered his body. It was very mysterious. He was cultivating the four extremes scripture. As the starlight entered his body, it quickly reached a saturation point. Lin Tian began to circulate the four extremes scripture. In an instant, the starlight in his body seemed to turn into sharp blades, crazily cutting his flesh as if to reforge his flesh. Lin Tian felt excruciating pain, and his forehead was instantly covered with sweat. He wanted to roar out loud, but he held it back. Lin Shi was still beside him, and he didn't want to wake up the little girl who was sleeping soundly. In the night sky, starlight poured down, entering Lin Tian's body. At this moment, Lin Tian was operating his four extreme meridians, enduring great pain. He clenched his teeth and endured, large beads of sweat rolling down his cheeks. Gradually, the sound of wind and thunder reverberated in Lin Tian's body, and the pain that followed became even more intense. On this night, Lin Tian was leaning against a thick tree trunk, enduring a heart-wrenching pain as he revolved his four extremes meridians over and over again. There were several times when he nearly fainted from the pain, but he managed to endure it and break through his limits several times. Soon, the stars in the sky disappeared, and a wisp of light appeared on the horizon. As dawn approached, the air in the mountains was a bit moist. Lin Tian opened his eyes and felt comfortable all over. He felt refreshed and full of energy. "So this is the cultivation of a warrior, it's amazing!" Lin Tian whispered. After an entire night of cultivation, he had now reached the third level of the body refinement realm. The body refinement realm was divided into 9 levels. The first 3 levels tempered the flesh, the middle 3 tempered the bones, and the last 3 tempered the internal organs. After a warrior reached the 9th level of the body refinement realm, he would be able to draw more spiritual energy into his body, stimulating the acupoints all over his body, connecting the meridians all over his body, and forming the divine meridians in his body. From there, he would reach the next level, which was called the Divine Meridians realm. The Divine Meridians realm was also divided into 9 levels. After a warrior condensed 9 divine meridians, he would gather the power of the 9 divine meridians and open up a sea of consciousness in his head. He could observe the heavens and the earth, and see through all things. His strength was extremely terrifying. This realm was called the Sea of Consciousness realm. Warriors in the Sea of Consciousness realm had extraordinary combat strength, and even the imperial family of an empire had to pay respect to them. After that was the incomparably powerful Airborne realm. Warriors in this realm could already control the spiritual energy of heaven and earth as they wished, and could even fly in the air, which was extremely terrifying. In front of a warrior in the Airborne realm, imperial power was just a joke. If a warrior in this realm wanted to, it would not be difficult to destroy an empire. Body refinement, divine meridians, Sea of Consciousness, and Airborne realm. The world of warriors is really interesting, Lin Tian thought to himself. After that, he closed his eyes and let his body slowly adapt to the power of the 3rd level of the body refinement realm. Chapter 5. The sky was completely bright. Standing on the mountain, one could clearly see the Lin clan's ancestral residence in Fengjian City. Lin Shi had already woken up. She looked in the direction of the residence and sobbed softly. Her tears couldn't stop flowing down. "Xiao Shi, don't cry. Big brother is here." Lin Tian comforted her gently. Lin Shi wiped away her tears, revealing a sweet smile and saying, "And with Big Brother here, Xiao Shi is not afraid of anything." Lin Tianji felt a lump in his throat. How could he not see that the little girl's smile was very forced? He knew even more clearly that Lin Shi just didn't want him to worry. An 8-year-old girl actually knew how to dote on others. "Xiao Shi, be good. Big Brother swears that whatever they owe us, Big Brother will definitely make them pay back double," he said. The sky was already bright. Lin Tian didn't return to Fengjian City. Instead, he temporarily stayed on the Green Mountain. Over the next few days, he spent all his time cultivating the four extreme scriptures. Occasionally, he would browse through the strange patterns that surged into his mind. Finally, he sorted out a set of mysterious movement techniques called the yin and yang steps. Swish! 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 In the Green Mountain, Lin Tian was shuttling rapidly. There were dense trees all around, and the gaps were extremely small. Even walking was very difficult. However, Lin Tian's speed was extremely fast. His footwork was also very agile. He could always quickly pass through every gap. After a while, Lin Tian stopped. This duality steps is really strange. When executed, it is as though I am riding on the clouds. Lin Tian muttered to himself. He wiped off the sweat on his forehead and rested for a moment before he started cultivating again. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, 5 days had passed. On this day, Lin Tian woke up from his cultivation and raised his head to look at Fengjian City. Fengjian City had a martial arts academy named Nine Yang Martial House. The Nine Yang Martial House would recruit disciples on this day every year. Lin Tian was preparing to apply for the Nine Yang Martial House. Although he had a supreme-grade body-tempering cultivation technique, cultivation wasn't just about having a cultivation technique. It also required a huge amount of resources. These resources were related to many aspects, such as elixirs, immortal herbs, martial skills, and special cultivation grounds. These resources were very difficult for him to find, but the Nine Yang Martial House could provide them to him. If he wanted to become stronger and advance quickly on the path of cultivation, he had to enter the Nine Yang Martial House. As long as he could enter the Nine Yang Martial House and obtain a good result, he would be able to obtain an endless stream of rewards. These rewards could be pills, tyrannical martial skills, or astonishing treasures. He needed these things very much. Xiaoxi, let's go back to the city, he said to Lin Shi. And Lin Shi responded, and then whispered, But big brother, will it be dangerous? Lin Tian knew what Lin Shi was worried about. He lovingly rubbed the little girl's head. Don't worry. No matter what happens, big brother will protect Xiaoxi, he said with a smile. At the beginning of spring, the plaza in front of the Nine Yang Martial House was already crowded with people. This was the day the martial house recruited disciples every year. The number of people who came to apply was uncountable. At the edge of the plaza, Lin Tian and Lin Shi arrived. He didn't bring Lin Shi back to the Lin family's old house. The old house was already burned and he didn't want Lin Shi to be sad. It is said that there are many strong people in the examination this time. Some of them have already reached the peak of the 4th level of body refinement, and they are very young. They are not even 16 years old this year. It can't be? So abnormal. How can it be fake? Moreover, it is said that there are many strong people like that. Doesn't that mean we have no hope? The Nine Yang Martial House recruited disciples every year, but there was a limit to the number of people they could recruit. At most, they could only recruit 150 people. If there were many strong people, then the chances of others entering the martial house would decrease. These people would naturally be worried. Lin Tian was flabbergasted. His heart was also slightly shocked. Not even 16 years old, and already at the peak of the 4th level of body refinement. It was indeed abnormal. I have the 4 extreme scriptures and the yin-yang steps. Now that I am also at the 3rd level of body refinement, entering the martial house shouldn't be a problem, Lin Tian thought to himself. As he was thinking, he suddenly felt a few gazes fall on him from afar. He turned around and his face suddenly became cold. About 30 meters away, Mo Sen's servant, Lu Er, appeared and walked towards him with a sinister smile. Little bastard, I knew you would come to apply for the Nine Yang Martial House. I didn't wait here in vain. There were 6 people behind Lu Er. 5 of them were brawny and 1 was middle-aged. The 5 brawny men all had a fiendish appearance. The middle-aged man had his hands behind his back and a cold expression on his face. P.S. Today is the first day of the new book. The dragon will try to make everyone happy. Thank you for your support. Chapter 6. Lin Tian's expression turned cold as he stared at Lu Er, who was walking over. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He was just worrying about how to find this dog of a slave. Brother! Lin Shi was very scared. She hid behind Lin Tian and clutched tightly onto Lin Tian's clothes. Lin Tian turned around, squatted down, and patted Lin Shi's head lightly. Xiao Shi, don't be afraid. Brother is here. He asked Lin Shi to stay where she was and turned to look at Lu Er and the others. A few days ago, what Lu Er and Ma Zi did to Lin Shi was still vivid in his mind. He didn't forget that he was now Lin Shi's brother, and Lin Shi was also his only relative in this strange world. She was his sister. He would never forgive anyone who hurt his sister. Ma Zi was already dead, and Lu Er had to pay the price. Around them, many people noticed the abnormality and looked over. It's him! That brat from the Lin clan, Xiao Yun's fiancé. A few days ago, the Lin clan's ancestral home was burned down by Mo Sen's servants. I didn't expect that brat to still be alive. He is really lucky. So what? Isn't he in danger now? Mo Sen has always been interested in Xiao Yun. How could he tolerate the Lin clan's brat? If the Lin clan had always been strong, it would have been fine, but now… Sigh, that brat is really dead this time. Mo Sen isn't the key. The key is his brother, Mog. That is a terrifying person. It is said that that man has reached the Divine Vein realm and is serving in the Empire's expeditionary army. He is extremely terrifying. With such a terrifying brother, how can that brat Lin Tian compete with Mo Sen? He can only be easily crushed to death. Don't forget that Mo Sen has an uncle. It is said that he is an elder of the 9 Young Martial House. He was originally the richest merchant in Fengjian City. Who would have thought that he would fall to such a state? How sad! Some people whispered. Almost all the people in the square were young people who came to apply for the 9 Young Martial House. Many of them grew up in Fengjian City and naturally knew about Lin Tian. They looked at Lin Tian and shook their heads. They felt that Lin Tian was going to be miserable this time. Lu Er walked over and laughed sinisterly. Break his arms and legs and bring him to young Master Mo. Lu Er instructed the 5 brawny men. He then looked at Lin Tian and said with a wicked smile, All right, don't worry about your little sister, this young master will take good care of her, hey! Go! Lu Er shouted. Among the 6 men, 5 of them walked towards Lin Tian with sinister smiles on their faces, their fists clenched so tightly that cracking sounds could be heard. Lin Tian's expression was cold and indifferent. Before the 5 of them could get close, he moved first. He took a big stride forward and appeared in front of the 5 of them. He clenched his right hand into a fist and swung it out mercilessly. Bang! Lin Tian's fist smashed the bridge of the nose of the person in the front. He immediately let out a blood-curdling scream as blood flowed out incessantly. The other 4 were shocked, and each of them threw out a punch. Unfortunately, how could the current Lin Tian be compared to a few ordinary strong men? The strength of a 3rd-rank body refinement cultivator was not like a cabbage that could be found on the streets. In just a blink of an eye, the 4 strong men were sent flying one after another, falling to the ground and howling in grief. Is that the kid from the Lin family? Wasn't it rumored that he was weak and sickly? Now this is… Many people were shocked, their faces were filled with disbelief. Lu Er's expression changed. These 5 strong men were stronger than Ma Zi. Last time, the 2 of them suffered a great loss at the hands of Lin Tian. Ma Zi was killed, so this time he brought these 5 strong men to guard this place. But he did not think that these 5 men would be so easily defeated by Lin Tian. You actually dare to fight back, your courage is not small. See how this young master will deal with you later. Lu Er malevolently stared at Lin Tian, and then with a flattering face, he looked at the middle-aged man beside him and said, Master Lu, please make your move. But do not take his life. Just cripple his hands and feet. This little one still has to leave him alive to report to the young master. The middle-aged man's name was Lu He, and he was a guard of the Mo family. He was already at the 1st-rank body refinement realm. This time, Lu He only agreed to come because of Mo's senator. Hearing Lu Er's words, Lu He nodded and took a step forward. Cripple your own hands and feet, I don't want to make a move. Lu He stared at Lin Tian and said indifferently. Relying on you? Lin Tian's face was cold. Lu He's eyes suddenly turned cold. You don't know what's good for you. As his words fell, Lu He threw a punch at Lin Tian. At the same time, a fierce wind blew out, strong and overbearing. Lin Tianling humphed, he did not dodge, and also threw a punch forward. Pun! Ah! Lu He screamed, the two fists collided. His finger bones were directly shattered by Lin Tian's punch. His whole body flew out, tumbling in the air and fell to the ground, unable to get up. Lu Er's eyes widened, his face changed. Impossible! Lu Er exclaimed. Lu He, who was at the first firmament of body refinement, was actually sent flying by Lin Tian's punch. Fear rose in his heart, he turned around and ran. Unfortunately, how could his speed be faster than Lin Tian's? He only ran 3 feet before Lin Tian caught up with him, and with one punch, he fell to the ground. Young Master Lin, don't hit me, I was wrong, I beg you. Please be magnanimous and let me go. Lu Er begged for mercy. Let you go? Is that possible? Lin Tianling smiled. He remembered what happened that day in the ancestral home, remembered Lin Xi's trembling appearance, and a cruel light flashed in his eyes. He raised his right leg, the bottom of his foot stirred up wind, and ruthlessly kicked Lu Er's crotch. Ah! Lu Er screamed like a pig being slaughtered, blood flowed out from his crotch, and the pain made him faint. All around, many of the onlookers sucked in a breath of cold air. So ruthless! This is definitely going to be crippled! Some people whispered. Some of them even shuddered and subconsciously covered their crotch area. That kick was too vicious. Chapter 7. Lin Tian actually wanted to kill Lu Er, but today was the important day of the 9 young martial houses recruitment. If he killed Lu Er here, he might lose the qualification to enter the 9 young martial house. Therefore, he held back his killing intent. The surrounding crowd was dumbfounded. They were all stunned. Such a ruthless method! Someone whispered. Many people revealed a strange expression. These people were the youths of Fengjian City. They were familiar with Lin Tian. In these people's impression, Lin Tian was always gentle or cowardly. But now, in their eyes, Lin Tian seemed to be a completely different person. This contrast surprised them. Get out of the way! A commotion came from not far away. The crowd was pushed aside, and a man and a woman walked out. The man was wearing purple clothes, and there was a long sword at his waist. He was very handsome, and the woman had white skin. Her long hair draped over her shoulders, and she had a seductive look about her. She was a rare beauty. Lin Tian saw the two people and the sneer on his face became thicker. This man and woman were Mo Sin and Xiaoyun. Xiaoyun glanced at Lin Tian. She was surprised, but this surprise quickly disappeared. Her expression became indifferent once again. She seemed cold and arrogant, like a white swan. Mo Sin glanced at Lu Er and the others. He looked at Lin Tian coldly. I didn't expect your life to be so tough. I haven't seen you for a few days and you've grown up. The Mo family was a very famous family in Fengjian City. Mo Sin had always been obsessed with Xiaoyun, so he was very unhappy with Lin Tian. Although the Lin family was no longer the same as before and Xiaoyun was with him, as long as Lin Tian was alive, he would feel very uncomfortable. God doesn't like trash pickers like you, so he let me live. He also gave me some good gifts to send you to hell. Lin Tian smiled evilly. Mo Sin frowned. You said I'm trash picker? Of course. Lin Tian shrugged. He glanced at Xiaoyun and said, I don't want this woman anymore. You want trash that I don't want anymore. If you're not trash picker, then what are you? When these words came out, Mo Sin's face became very ugly. He wanted the woman that the previous man didn't want. For a man, these words were undoubtedly very destructive. What did you say I am? Xiaoyun screamed. She was spoiled since she was young. She was like a princess. No one dared to humiliate her like this. Lin Tian glanced at her and said, You didn't hear me clearly? Fine, I'll say it again, Xiaoyun, I don't want you. From now on, I'll officially divorce you. You bitch can go and live your life with that pretty boy. I hope that you can report to the underworld as soon as possible. In the crowd, the youths who grew up in Fengjian City were stunned. Is this really Lin Tian? That Lin was to be able to say Lin Tian to be Lin. Xiaoyun was embarrassed and angry. Emosen also felt his cheeks burning. You're courting death. Emosen pulled out his long sword and slashed towards Lin Tian. At this moment, a grand bell rang. Lin Tian looked towards the front of the square. The bell rang, indicating that the 9 young martial houses examination had truly begun. You're lucky that the bell rang at this time. Emosen stared at Lin Tian sinisterly. Lin Tian smiled. After the martial house's examination truly begins, this place forbids all quarrels and private fights. You should be glad that the bell saved you. Otherwise, you would be even more miserable than those dog slaves. What did you say? Emosen's face turned cold. What, you don't understand human language like that, bitch Xiaoyun? You're really a match made in heaven. Lin Tian mocked. He no longer paid attention to Emo's senator. He followed the crowd and walked forward, leaving Emosen and Xiaoyun staring at him with anger. Chapter 8. The 9 young martial houses examination was divided into 3 parts: talent, state of mind, and combat. On this day, the first round of the examination was to test talent. For a martial artist, talent was the most important factor as it determined the martial artist's future achievements. The so-called talent was simply a martial artist's affinity with the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. If a martial artist's affinity with the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was insufficient, then they would not be able to absorb the spiritual qi for cultivation. Naturally, their future achievements would not be high. On the other hand, if a martial artist's affinity with the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was high, then they would be able to absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth for cultivation. This way, not only would their cultivation speed be extremely fast, but their future achievements would also be extremely high. It was also because of this that the talent test was an unshakable part of the 9 young martial houses examination every year. There was a high platform in front of the 9 young martial house. At this moment, an old man stepped onto the platform and said, Everyone knows the rules, but this old man will still say it once more. Those who are under the age of 17 in the second stage of body refinement are eligible to take the examination. Those who do not meet this condition, leave immediately and do not disturb the martial house's examination. Under the age of 17, the second stage of body refinement is really strict. Lin Tian muttered to himself. However, he was not worried. He was 16 this year and completely qualified to take the examination. The 9 young martial house had a total of 50 places for the talent test. After the examination began, the candidates quickly lined up into 50 teams. The 50 teams had a stone tablet at the front of each team. These stone tablets were carved with 9 5-pointed star patterns from bottom to top. It was a tool specifically used to test a martial artist's talent. Next, we will begin the first round of the examination, the talent test. Candidates who are taking the examination, place your right hand on the stone tablet and circulate the true yuan in your body. After that, the number of stars lit up on the stone tablet will be your talent value. 1 star lit up is a 1-star talent, 2 stars lit up is a 2-star talent, and so on. Those with 3 stars will pass. The examination begins, the old man said. As the old man's words fell, a candidate in front of a certain team suddenly moved. He carefully placed his hand on the stone tablet and circulated the true yuan in his body. In an instant, the stone tablet lit up. From bottom to top, 2 stars lit up. 2 stars talent, disqualified. The examiner in charge of this team said lightly. Immediately, the candidate's face was filled with disappointment as he walked out of the crowd and left. At the same time, candidates in the other teams also began to take the examination. 2-star talent, disqualified. 1-star talent, disqualified. 2-star talent, disqualified. 3-star talent, qualified. 1-star talent, disqualified. The examiner's voice rang out continuously, echoing in the air above the square. Very quickly, a quarter of an hour passed. Lin Tian was a little surprised. In this half a quarter of an hour, a total of nearly 3,000 people from the 50 teams had participated in the assessment, but less than 100 people had actually passed. What a high elimination rate! Lin Tian was speechless. Actually, he didn't know that although the Northern Flame country had a large population, the number of people who were truly suitable for martial cultivation was less than 10%. Furthermore, the 9 young martial houses requirement for the disciples' innate talent was much higher than the ordinary standard of suitable for martial cultivation. Therefore, the elimination rate was naturally very high. This was very normal. 2-star talent, disqualified. 3-star talent, qualified. 2-star talent, disqualified. The examiner's voice continued to ring out. At this moment, there was an exclamation in front of a team at the side. Lin Tian tilted his head and saw a man in purple standing in front of that team. It was Emo's senator. His palm was placed on the stone tablet, and there were 5 stars shining on the tablet. 5-star talent! Oh my God! Who is that? Fengjian City's Emosen, Emoji's younger brother. You don't know him? Emoji? That Emoji who is serving in the Empire's expeditionary force. That's right. His. There were discussions all around. Many people gasped, not only because of Emosen's 5-star talent, but also because of Emosen's elder brother, Emoji, who was a super terrifying person. The examiner looked at Emosen and smiled. Very good. You are indeed that person's younger brother. In the Northern Flame country, 2-star talent was suitable for cultivation, 3-star talent was considered top grade, 4-star talent was exceptional, and 5-star talent was considered a genius. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that 1 in 10,000 was a genius. Emosen's 5-star martial Dao talent had indeed shocked many people here. Go and rest. Prepare for the second round of assessment. The examiner smiled. Emosen nodded and walked to the side proudly. The assessment continued. After Emosen, it was Xiao Yun's turn. Compared to Emosen, Xiao Yun was much worse. She had just reached 3-star talent and barely passed. At this moment, it was Lin Tian's turn to take the test. Emosen hadn't gone far when he saw Lin Tian walk to the stone tablet. He sneered and said sarcastically, "The last wild brat of the Lin family, you have always been weak and sickly. You dare to take the test with your weak body? You better go back. Do you really think you can practice martial arts just because you can beat a few slaves? Don't make a fool of yourself." Lin Tian glanced at Emosen and didn't bother to respond to him. He didn't care about the first test at all. In the past few days, he had been absorbing the power of the stars every night to practice the 4 extreme scriptures. He knew from the information that came into his mind that the power of the stars was much stronger than the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. He could even draw the power of the stars, so what was the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? Seeing that Lin Tian ignored him, Emosen's face turned colder. Humph. Martial arts talent is innate. You can't do it. Emosen looked at Lin Tian with an arrogant expression and said, "Let's take 10,000 steps back. Even if you have the talent to practice martial arts, so what? Can you reach 5-star talent? I am a 5-star talent, a genius. An existence that you can only look up to in your life." Beside him, Xiao Yun held Emosen's arm and looked at Lin Tian with contempt. "Lin Tian, with your weak body, you can't even compare to me. Let alone Emo's senator. You are at most a 2-star talent. You can't pass the first test. Give up. It's not too late to give up now. Don't embarrass yourself." Nearby, many examinees looked over. Let's not talk about whether he can pass or not. A 5-star talent is absolutely impossible. Nonsense, isn't that obvious? Many people discussed. Emosen hugged Xiaoyun's waist and smiled evilly. Yuner, you forgot that you have something to say to Lin. Yes, I almost forgot. Xiaoyun nodded. She looked down at Lin Tian like a proud princess and said, Lin Tian, I know you're unwilling to accept this. That's why you deliberately contradicted me and Emosen in an attempt to regain some face in front of others. However, no matter how unwilling or uncomfortable you are, there are some things that I still have to say. Listen clearly, you and I are not at the same level at all. You are not worthy of me from the beginning. Only a talented powerhouse like Emosen can be with me. The person I want to marry can only be Emosen. Lin Tian's expression was calm, as if he didn't hear the two at all. He raised his right hand and placed it on the stone tablet. The stone tablet trembled slightly, and in an instant, 4 star patterns lit up. 4-star talent. Beside them, everyone was moved and revealed a shocked expression. Lin Tian looked at Xiaoyun, his face full of disdain. 2 years ago, I still remember someone always sticking behind my butt, calling me Brother Tian. How cute, how obedient, how cute. Look at you now, you are like a clown. Thinking about how I was called Brother Tian by someone like you, it's really disgusting. You. Xiaoyun's expression instantly became very ugly. Emosen's face was cold as he snorted. You are only a 4-star talent. You are far from being comparable to me. Lin Tian tilted his head, looked at Emosen, and suddenly smiled evilly. Buzz. The stone tablet on his right hand trembled again, and 6-star patterns lit up. 6-star talent. Everyone's pupils shrank. At this moment, even the examiners of the 9-yang martial house were alarmed and revealed a shocked expression. Since the establishment of the 9-yang martial house, there had only been one 6-star talent disciple in history. Lin Tian looked at Emosen and said, Is 5-star talent that great? Genius? Someone that I have to look up to my entire life? His words were calm, but there was a hint of sarcasm in them. Emosen's expression became extremely ugly. Before Lin Tian took the test, he kept saying that he was a genius, that Lin Tian was far inferior to him, and that he was someone that Lin Tianyi had to look up to for his entire life. Now, Lin Tian's martial Dao talent was revealed. It was like a resounding slap that made his face hurt. 6-star talent, this is impossible. The test tablet must be broken, he said gloomily. Hearing his words, many examinees revealed a doubtful expression. After all, 6-star talent was too shocking. The test tablet is broken? Lin Tian looked at Emosen indifferently and said, A man who is unwilling to admit defeat, what a joke. He placed his right hand on the stone tablet and did not move. His eyes focused, and the true origin in his body surged rapidly. Buzz! The stone tablet trembled, and the 7-star pattern lit up. How is this possible? Exclamations sounded. 7-star talent, what kind of concept was that? This? Many people felt that they were going numb. However, this was not the end. In the next moment, the 8-star pattern on the stone tablet lit up. 8-8. The crowd was stunned. Many people stared in front of them with their mouths agape, as if they were dreaming. At this moment, a cold voice resounded throughout the entire place. 9th star, light up for me. Lin Tian's eyes lit up, and the true origin in his body surged. His right hand that was placed on the stone tablet suddenly had a faint silver glow. Then, the stone tablet shook even more violently. Finally, the 9th star pattern lit up. Chapter 9. The 15 minutes of rest time passed quickly. Lin Tian temporarily entrusted Lin Shi to an old man he was familiar with in the city. Then, under the guidance of the examiner, he followed the examinees to the location of the second round of assessment. The second round of assessment was to test one's mental state. The path of martial arts was full of ups and downs. Talent was important, but so was one's mental state. If one only had strong talent without a tenacious mental state, their future martial arts achievements would be uncertain. They might even be inferior to those with weaker talent. One had to know that there were many temptations in the world. Power, wealth, and beauty could be fatal to a martial artist. If one's mental state wasn't strong enough, it was possible to get lost in it and lose the motivation to move forward. Therefore, talent was only a prerequisite. Without a tenacious martial heart, it was useless no matter how strong one's talent was. The location of the 9 young martial houses' mental state test was in a spacious courtyard behind the martial house. In the center of the courtyard was a large array. The array was carved by a spiritual sea realm expert. It was an illusion array that was specially used to test a martial artist's mental state. Lin Tian followed the other examinees to the martial house's back courtyard. Emosen and Xiao Yun were also in the crowd. Their faces were extremely gloomy as they stared at Jiang Xiaofan's back like a poisonous snake. Elder Mo, you are back. In front, the examiner in charge of the second round of assessment stopped. A 47-year-old middle-aged man walked in that direction. His aura was very steady. Seeing this middle-aged man, Emosen's face lit up as he approached him. Uncle! Approaching the middle-aged man, Emosen called out. The middle-aged man nodded at him and casually glanced at the examinees. Then, he looked at the examiner in front. I heard that there is a 9-star talent martial artist. Who is it? The examiner was about to answer, but Emosen beat him to it. It's him. That wild brat from the Lin clan. Emosen pointed at Lin Tian. The middle-aged man was called Moe. He was from the Fengjian city's Mo clan and was also one of the elders in the 9 young martial house. After hearing Emosen's words, he looked at Lin Tian with cold eyes. After a moment, he retracted his gaze and looked at the examiner in front. Bring them to the testing location. Tell them the rules in advance. After greeting him, he led the way to the backyard. During the second round of assessment, the elders of the 9 young martial house would occasionally come personally. This time, his nephew Emosen was participating in the martial house's assessment. Furthermore, he was a 5-star talent, so he naturally had to go and take a look. Humph! Emosen sneered and swept a glance at Lin Tian before following Moe to the backyard. Lin Tian's expression was calm. He was extremely disdainful of Emosen's actions. He followed the crowd, and under the guidance of the examiner, they soon arrived at the location of the second round of testing. All of you go in. Later on, all of you will fall into a huge illusion. The content of the illusion is the second round of the test. There are a total of 3 stages in this round of the test, and the time limit is 4 hours. The earlier you walk out of the illusion, the stronger your state of mind is. Those who have not walked out of the illusion after 4 hours will be disqualified and will be eliminated, the examiner said. As he finished speaking, all the examinees entered the formation one after another. Activate the formation! Seeing that all the examinees had entered the formation, the examiner shouted loudly. Lin Tian stood in the formation. The moment he heard the words, "Activate the formation," the scene in front of him changed drastically. A blood-red space appeared in front of him. Countless malicious spirits bared their fangs and brandished their claws. There were even Oxhead and Horseface striding towards him. The iron chain swayed, and the huge axes were awe-inspiring. It was as if they were going to drag him into eternal hell. Lin Tian's expression was calm, and he did not care at all. After living 2 lives, would he still be afraid of malicious spirits? He stood still on the spot. The malicious spirits, Oxhead, and Horseface rushed over and directly passed through his body. The first stage passed. Boring, he said indifferently in his heart. In the next moment, the scene changed again. The sun was setting in the west. At the end of the horizon, thousands of soldiers and horses were galloping, causing the ground to tremble. Thousands of cavalrymen were holding battle spears, and all of them were surrounded by bloody battle chi as they charged towards him. Lin Tian stood still on the spot, and his expression did not change at all. A few days ago, on the Green Mountain outside Fengjian City, he had an incomparably realistic dream. 9 unfamiliar figures were fighting in front of him, tearing the sky apart and sinking the earth. Heaven, earth, yin, and yang were all twisted and turned upside down because of the 9 people's battle. Compared to that dream, what was the scene in front of him? Thousands of cavalrymen rushed over, and the powerful aura shot into the sky. However, when they got close to Lin Tian, the illusion could not hold on at all. The thousands of cavalrymen collapsed in an instant and disappeared on the spot. The second stage passed. The last stage, Lin Tian muttered to himself. In the third stage, he appeared in a luxurious palace. The palace was filled with ripples of pink gauze, and there was a fragrance in the air. Dozens of beautiful girls in transparent thin clothes, their skin faintly discernible. They danced their enchanting figures and slowly approached him. In an instant, the palace was filled with the color of spring, and the aura of extravagance intertwined in every inch of the air. The dozens of girls laughed coquettishly. They were charming and moving, like dozens of fairies. "Come on!" A seductive voice sounded, and the dozens of girls leaned against Lin Tian. Their jade-like skin rubbed against Lin Tian's body as they slowly took off their clothes. In an instant, dozens of graceful and moving bodies were presented in front of Lin Tian without reservation. This was a primal temptation, enough to make any man's blood boil. Tisk! Lin Tian stood still, and the corner of his mouth curled into a sneer. He looked down on everything. As a person of 2 lifetimes, in addition to the incident with Xiaoyun after transmigrating to this world, he deeply understood a principle. In this world, if you had no money, no power, and were not strong enough, beautiful women were just floating clouds and bubbles. Right now, he had nothing. Therefore, to him, all of this was an illusion. Being in this palace, his heart was like a boulder, and he was as immovable as a mountain. Now, all he had to do was cultivate and become stronger. On a white jade platform in the courtyard, Moe looked at the array with his hands behind his back. Beside him were 2 other people. These 2 were also elders of the 9-yang martial house. One was called Mu Qing, and the other was called Sherdong. There are many outstanding talents in this assessment. Who do you think will be the first to walk out of the illusion in this second round of assessment? Mu Qing said. This person looked at the array in front of him, but his eyes were fixed on Lin Tian. The elder in charge of the first round of assessment had already told the results of the talent assessment to Mu Qing and the other elders. Mu Qing was naturally full of expectations for such a 9-star talent. It's hard to say. Determination and talent have nothing to do with each other. Some martial artists are extremely talented, but their determination is extremely weak. And some martial artists have extremely low talent, and they don't even have the talent to cultivate, but their determination is extremely frightening. Sherdong shook his head. Moe, what do you think? Same. Sherdong smiled and said. However, no matter how outstanding this batch of candidates are, in terms of determination, no one can compare to that child Mog. That child can be considered the strongest martial artist I've ever seen in my life. That's true. That guy's martial heart is truly terrifying. It's as if he was born for martial arts. Mu Qing agreed. Mog was Moe's nephew. Hearing their conversation, Moe couldn't help but smile. That child Mo-sin is influenced by his elder brother. His determination can't be too bad. I think that the first person to walk out of the illusion, Mo-sin's chances should be higher. Moe said. Sherdong nodded. It's very possible. Speaking of which, how long did Mog take? It seems to be a quarter of an hour. That's right, a quarter of an hour. Counting it, it's only been a quarter of an hour. We can still rest for a while. The 3 of them chatted and laughed. However, in the next moment, their expressions froze at the same time. In front of them, in the array, Lin Tian suddenly opened his eyes. What's going on? Could it be? The 3 people's expressions changed. In the array, Lin Tian calmly glanced at the other candidates in the array. Then, under the examiner's widened eyes, he calmly walked out of the array. Looking at Lin Tian walking to the side, the examiner in charge of the second round of assessment was almost petrified on the spot. A quarter of an hour, out of the illusion! Chapter 10. In the backyard of the 9-yang martial house, there was naturally more than one examiner for the second round of assessment. At this moment, Everyone was stunned. They looked at Lin Tian in disbelief as though they were looking at a monster. MOG's record has been broken. Mu Qing was stunned. Generally speaking, in the second round of the 3 layers of illusions, an ordinary person would need an hour to walk out. MOG had spent a quarter of an hour to break through all of the illusions. That was already astonishing to the extreme, breaking all of the Martial House's historical records. But now, this record had been broken once again. 15 minutes. It had only taken 15 minutes. Sherdong smiled bitterly. Does this young man not have any distracting thoughts in his heart? As elders of the 9 Martial House, Mu Qing and Sherdong's cultivation naturally couldn't be low. Their knowledge was extraordinary, but at this moment both of them were stunned. Breaking all the illusions in 15 minutes. What kind of thought was that? However, after the shock, both of them revealed a joyful expression. Such a genius! That's great! Mu Qing said. The 9 Martial House recruited students once a year. Now that they were able to recruit such a monstrous disciple with such talent and mental state, how could they not be happy? Mo Yi's face was gloomy. Just a moment ago, he was full of confidence that Mo Sin had the highest chance of being the first to walk out of the illusions. In the next moment, Lin Tian walked out of the illusions and even broke Mo's record. Where could he put his old face? Outside the array, Lin Tian walked to a bluestone not far away and sat down. To him, the 3 layers of illusions weren't much. He closed his eyes and thought about the upcoming 3rd round of assessment. The 3rd round of assessment was a real battle. He lacked experience in this aspect, so he had to think about it carefully. After all, these candidates weren't weak. The weakest was at the 2nd level of body refinement, which was far from what Lu He and the others could compare with. This scene fell into the eyes of Mu Qing and Sherdong, and both of them nodded at the same time. Not arrogant or rash, calm and peaceful. Not bad. Not bad at all, Mu Qing said. Moe snorted. Pretending to be profound. Mu Qing and Sherdong were helpless, but they didn't refute. His nephew's limelight had been stolen, so it was normal for Moe to be unhappy. At this moment, hundreds of examinees were still struggling bitterly in the array. As far as the eye could see, some had pale faces, some had ferocious expressions, some had intoxicated expressions, and some were even sweating profusely. Obviously, they were enduring an extremely great test. Very quickly an hour passed. In the great array, the second person opened his eyes. This person was Mo's Senator. Moe was right about one thing. Mo Sin was influenced by his elder brother, Mog. His will was not weak, and Mo Sin had great confidence in himself. Half an hour. Mo Sin muttered to himself with a satisfied look on his face. An hour. This result could not be compared to his elder brother Mog, but it was enough to show disdain for his peers. He glanced proudly at the other examinees in the array, wanting to see Lin Tian struggling bitterly in the illusion. However, he quickly frowned. There was actually no sign of Lin Tian in the array. He raised his head and looked outside the formation. His face immediately twisted. He thought that Lin Tian should still be struggling in the illusion. He didn't expect that Lin Tian had already come out and was resting with his eyes closed. Damn it! His eyes were full of murderous intent. On the bluestone, Lin Tian seemed to feel Mo Sin's gaze. He slowly opened his eyes. Looking at Mo Sin, who was clenching his fists in the array, he revealed a faint smile and said, "Genius, you're awake?" Chapter 11. Mo Sin's face turned gloomy. He was suppressed by Lin Tian in the talent test, but he never thought that he would be overshadowed by Lin Tian in the second test of mental state. If not for Lin Tian, he would have been the most dazzling person in this Martial House exam. Genius, why is your face so ugly? Could it be that you want to release a fart? Lin Tian pretended to be surprised. Mo Sin couldn't hold it in any more and roared. Little bastard, what did you say? You really want to fart, but this fart is really smelly. No wonder you have been holding it in. Lin Tian smiled. Mo Sen's face became even more distorted. He finally understood that he had fallen into Lin Tian's trap. Damn thing! Just you wait! I, Mo Sen, swear that I will kill you. I will definitely kill you! You can only die! You must die! Mo Sen's face was sinister. Lin Tian sneered. Regarding this point, our thoughts are surprisingly identical. You threw me off the cliff a few days ago. Don't tell me that you think I have forgotten. He stared at Mo Sen, his eyes turning cold and filled with killing intent. You! Mo Sen was shocked by Lin Tian's killing intent and couldn't help but take a step back. However, he soon realized that this action was embarrassing. His face became even uglier as shame and anger mixed together. Humph! Lin Tianling snorted and ignored Mo Sen, closing his eyes once again. Time passed by slowly. In the array, one examinee after another woke up. Finally, the second round ended. Out of the 500 examinees, only 206 passed. The rest were all eliminated. Rest here for 15 minutes. Later, an examiner will lead you to the location of the third round. The examiner in charge of the second round said and turned to leave. In the distance, Mu Qing and Shudong glanced at Lin Tianyi and walked towards another place in the Nine-Yang martial house. 9-star talent, breaking through 3 layers of illusions in 15 minutes. I am really looking forward to this little guy's performance in the third round. Mu Qing smiled, and Shudong nodded. Only Mo Yi's expression was not very good. In the courtyard, more than 200 people were separated from each other by a certain distance. No one paid attention to each other, and they were even a little wary of each other. Because the third round was a duel, no one knew if the person next to them would become their enemy. Lin Tian sat on the bluestone with his eyes slightly closed. His expression was calm. Soon, 15 minutes passed, and the third round of the test began. This round of assessment was held in the Nine-Yang Martial House's martial arts arena. Lin Tian followed the rest of the examinees to the martial arts arena. There were over 10 martial arts arenas in front of him, and each of them was not small. All the examinees stood in the middle of the martial arts practice field, feeling a little nervous. This trial would decide whether they would stay or leave. The person in charge of the third round of examinations was a middle-aged man. He swept his eyes over all the candidates and lightly said, "In the third round of examinations, you will fight in pairs. The winner will remain and become a disciple of the martial house. The loser will be allowed to participate again next year." All the examinees hurriedly nodded. "Elder Moe, please draw lots," the middle-aged man said. In order to show fairness, the Nine-Yang martial house decided to draw lots for the third round of examinations. Lin Tian stood among the examinees. At this moment, he felt a sinister gaze land on him. He tilted his head and looked over, only to see Mo Sen staring at him from afar with a cold smile on his face. Seeing this scene, Lin Tian already knew the result. Sure enough, after half an hour, the name list was announced. His opponent was Mo's senior. "Little bastard, just you wait!" Mo Sen stared at Lin Tian maliciously. He wasn't surprised at all as he made a throat-slitting gesture. Lin Tian coldly swept a glance at Mo Sen, his heart filled with disdain. On a high platform not far from the martial arts arena, Mu Qing and Shudong frowned as they looked at Moe, who was walking back. The two of them weren't stupid. They could roughly guess what kind of tricks were involved. However, since the result was already decided, they couldn't say anything. If they raised any doubts now, wouldn't it be slapping the martial house's face? "Begin!" The middle-aged man in charge of the third round of examinations shouted. There were a total of 18 martial arts arenas in the Nine-Yang martial house's martial arts arena. At this moment, all 18 arenas were dueling at the same time. Immediately, shouts rang out, and the sound of swords clashing continued. "The duel between martial artists is indeed extraordinary." Lin Tian seriously watched the duels on the 18 arenas as his eyes flickered from time to time. He had only stepped on the path of martial arts for a few days, so he had very little experience in duels between martial artists. Compared to Lu He, it was nothing. At this moment, watching the duels between the various examinees had broadened his horizons. The duels continued, and during this process, some people won and couldn't help but cheer excitedly. Of course, there were winners and losers. Those who lost all had a look of unwillingness as they left dejectedly. Soon an hour passed. Lin Tian Mo Sr., the middle-aged man in charge of this round of examinations, shouted. Emosen sneered as he glanced at Lin Tian and took the lead to walk onto the arena. Standing on the arena, he pulled out the long sword at his waist and pointed it at Lin Tian, who was below the arena. This condescending attitude of looking down at Lin Tian made him feel very comfortable. Idiot! Lin Tian cursed. His expression was calm as he pulled out a long saber from the weapon rack and stepped onto the arena. For a moment, everyone's eyes fell on the two of them. A 9-star talent versus a 5-star talent. Without a doubt, in this third round of examinations, the duel between Lin Tian and Emosen was the most eye-catching. Seeing that the two of them were ready, the middle-aged man nodded and said, "Begin." "Wait." At this moment, Emosen suddenly spoke. The middle-aged man looked at him and asked, "What do you want?" Emosen glanced at Lin Tian and said in a clear voice, "The path of martial arts is full of ups and downs. On the path of cultivation, we will face all kinds of dangers at any time. For this reason, I suggest that the duel between Lin Tian and me need not end there. Both of us can take each other's life. I feel that this is the only way to maximize our martial arts potential." Wow! When these words came out, all the examinees were moved. Chapter 12. There was no need to stop at a certain point to take the other party's life. Wasn't this a battle of life and death? All the candidates' expressions changed. The middle-aged man presiding over the third round frowned and said, "No!" The Nine-Yang martial house had been established for decades, and such a thing had never happened in the history of the examination. Generally speaking, this was not allowed. Emosen shook his head, but he did not care about the middle-aged man's words. Instead, he tilted his head and looked at the high platform on the other side. "The elders are all here. Why don't we ask for their opinion?" The middle-aged man tilted his head and looked at the high platform. Not only him, but everyone looked over, including Lin Tian. Mu Qing and Sherdong shook their heads and were about to reject it, but Moe spoke first. Moe said indifferently, "The path of martial arts is indeed not easy. Since you have chosen this path, you must be prepared to face all challenges at any time. I feel that this proposal is not impossible. Of course, whether to proceed with the battle of life and death requires the agreement of both parties. Therefore, let them decide for themselves." Whoosh! The candidates around were moved again. They did not expect the elders to give such an answer. However, many people's eyes flashed with excitement. It was not easy to witness a battle of life and death. Many people wanted to watch the show. On the martial arts stage, Emosen stared at Lin Tian and sneered. "How about it, Lin Tian? Do you dare to accept the challenge? If you don't have the guts, I advise you to get down. Cowards don't have the right to step on the martial path." Hearing this, everyone in the surroundings looked at Lin Tian. Lin Tian snorted coldly in his heart, but his face was calm from beginning to end. He said, "No objections." As a person who had lived 2 lives, he would never back down before a challenge, let alone in front of someone like Mo's senator. He could not do such a thing. So what if it was a battle of life and death? If they want to fight, then let's fight. On the high platform, Mu Qing and Sherdong were helpless. Since Lin Tian and Emosen had agreed, they could not say anything. Moreover, between the two of them, only one of them would be able to stay. Whether the loser lived or died did not matter much. Moe stood up and said, "Since it's decided, let the duel begin. During the duel, no one is allowed to interfere." In an instant, everyone stared at the arena where Lin Tian and Emosen were. In fact, at that moment, the battles on the other martial practice stages had all stopped. Originally, the two of them were the most dazzling figures in this year's martial house entrance exam. Now that their duel had turned into a life-or-death battle, their allure was naturally even greater. On the martial arts stage, Emosen laughed sinisterly as he stared cruelly at Lin Tian. "Little bastard, you were lucky last time and managed to escape with your life. This time, you won't be so lucky." Lin Tian's expression was calm, and the long blade in his hand glowed with a faint cold light. "You talk too much." As soon as he finished speaking, he stomped his right foot on the martial arts platform and rushed over. Emosen snorted coldly and went forward with his sword in hand. The two figures crossed each other on the martial arts stage. Their swords and sabers collided with each other, producing clanging sounds. Emosen's sword momentum was very swift and fierce. Every move was fatal, causing many examinees to palpitate. "This Emosen is not only a 5-star talent, but he's also at the peak of the 4th level of body refinement. He's really terrifying. In comparison, although that Lin Tian is a 9-star talent, he's only at the 3rd level of body refinement. The gap between them is a bit large. That Lin Tian is really something. A 9-star talent, his future days are still long. Why is he trying to show off at this time? Now, I'm afraid it's a bit dangerous," someone whispered. The path of martial arts is mysterious within mysterious. The gap between each small realm is often enormous. Generally speaking, a martial artist at the 4th level of body refinement can fight against 10 martial artists at the 3rd level of body refinement, and not lose. In terms of strength, speed, and reaction, a martial artist at the 4th level of body refinement is much stronger than a martial artist at the 3rd level of body refinement. Many examinees shook their heads, feeling that Lin Tian would soon be defeated. However, very quickly, everyone was moved again. Facing Emosen, who was at the peak of the 4th level of body refinement, Lin Tian did not have the slightest bit of decadence. Although Emosen's attacks were swift and fierce, the long blade in Lin Tian's hand was always able to block Emosen's sword. Clang! 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 On the martial arts stage, the blade and sword constantly collided, sputtering out streaks of sparks. Lin Tian's expression was calm. The long blade in his hand seemed to have the help of the gods. Every swing of the blade seemed to have the strength of 1,000 pounds. This was his second time fighting with a real martial artist. However, since the start of the 3rd round of examinations, he had been observing the other examinees' duels. Regarding the battle between martial artists, he could be considered to have a lot of understanding. His battle strength was not inferior to Emosen's. Every time they collided, he and Emosen were actually evenly matched. It was difficult to determine the victor. "Enough!" Suddenly, Emosen coldly shouted. Lin Tian's expression changed slightly. He only felt that the sword in Emosen's hand had become terrifying. A layer of green light appeared on the sword's body. Chi! In an instant, his left arm was hit by the sword. His clothes were cut, and blood flowed out. Emosen coldly smiled and said, "So what if you have a 9-star talent? So what if you broke the illusion in half a quarter of an hour? Offending me, Emosen, only death awaits you." His sword's momentum was even more swift and fierce. With a swing of his sword, a sword shadow actually appeared in the air. Such a scene immediately caused everyone's expression to change. "This is a martial technique?" "Yes, it should be a martial technique without a doubt," someone exclaimed. A martial technique was a martial Dao battle skill that was used in conjunction with a martial artist's battle. This kind of battle skill could greatly increase a martial artist's battle strength. Sometimes, a powerful martial technique could even allow a martial artist to cross a few small realms to battle. One of the reasons why Lin Tian entered the Nine-Yang martial house was because of the martial Dao battle skills in the martial house. At this moment, on the high platform not far away, Mu Qing and Shudong were also shocked. "Mid-grade body refining realm martial technique, Crescent Sun swordsmanship," Mu Qing said in a low voice. He and Shudong looked at Moe and saw that Moe was expressionless. This made the two of them frown. "Dang! Dang! Dang!" On the martial arts stage, the sound of swords and sabers echoed from time to time, At this moment, Emosin, who displayed the crescent sun swordsmanship, was undoubtedly very powerful. He forced Lin Tian to be in a sorry state, and a few more sword wounds appeared on his body. This Lin Tian, I'm afraid it's over. No doubt he's dead for sure. Everyone shook their heads, thinking that Lin Tian was bound to lose. After all, Emosin was a small realm higher than Lin Tianyi, and now that he had a martial technique, Lin Tian was bound to lose under such circumstances. On the martial arts stage, Emosin sneered, and his sword was like a rainbow. Lu Er and Ma Zi, those two trash, they failed to humiliate a little girl. How useless! If those two trash could be a little more capable, even if you little bastard came back alive, it would be quite interesting to see your sister being humiliated to death. Lin Tian's body trembled slightly, and his eyes suddenly became incomparably cold. You asked them to do it, he said coldly. His long-lost anger surged, and he thought of Lin Shi's trembling appearance, and the long saber in his hand clenched even tighter. It was this young master, so what? Emosin sneered. I'll kill you! A voice mixed with icy killing intent sounded, and Lin Tian's figure suddenly became strange. With just a step, he appeared in front of Emosin in an instant, and the long saber in his hand slashed down mercilessly. So fast! Someone exclaimed. Emosin's expression changed. The speed that Lin Tian suddenly displayed shocked him. Too fast. At this moment, he had no time to block. Chapter 13. Lin Tian appeared in front of Emosin and slashed down with his long sword, leaving a deep scar on Emosin's chest. Fresh red blood instantly splashed into the air. He kicked Emosin's lower abdomen, and with a bang, Emosin immediately screamed and flew out. Such a turn of events immediately shocked everyone. Emosin used his long sword to support his body and stood up. He covered his chest with his hand, and his face became incomparably ferocious. Little bastard, you dare to hurt me! He roared violently. Lin Tian's face was as cold as frost. Without saying a word, he closed in on Emosin. This expression made Emosin extremely angry. You're courting death! He roared angrily and pushed the savage sun's sword art to the extreme, sweeping out a dense sword shadow. For a moment, the martial arts stage was completely covered by the cold sword chi. Many people felt a chill down their spines. Cultivation at the peak of the 4th level of the body refinement realm combined with a mid-level body refinement realm martial skill, the power was truly terrifying. However, everyone underestimated Lin Tian's speed. Lin Tian's eyes were cold. He did not dodge and rush towards Emosin at this moment. Every step he took, there would be a faint silver light flickering under his feet. It was like moving clouds and flowing water, giving people a feeling that it was completely natural. This is... On the high platform not far away, Mu Qing and the other two's expressions changed. Sherdong even stood up. Just as they were surprised, on the martial arts stage, Lin Tian had already avoided all the sword shadows. He suddenly appeared behind Emosin and punched out, sending Emosin flying again. Such a scene shocked everyone. Impossible! This is impossible! Emosin shouted. Lin Tian actually blocked his savage sun's sword art. This made him shocked and angry. He roared and crazily waved the long sword in his hand. In an instant, the martial arts stage was densely covered with sword shadows, scaring many examinees into shrinking their necks. Lin Tian's expression did not change in the slightest in the face of this dense sword shadow. He held the long sword in his hand, and with every step he took, he disappeared like a spirit crane. Not a single sword shadow could touch his body. A few days ago, when the mysterious iron sword disappeared into his body, a lot of strange information appeared in his mind. At first, he sorted out the 4 extreme scriptures. Then, he found a set of movement techniques from this information, the yin and yang steps. At this moment, he was using this unparalleled movement technique. Pooh! 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 Using the duality steps, he seemed to have fused with this space. The long saber in his hand kept landing on Emosin's body, bringing out streams of blood in the air. Thinking of the humiliation Lin Shi had suffered, the killing intent in his eyes became even more intense, and he showed no mercy. Ah! Emosen screamed. In a short period of time, his chest, shoulders, back, thighs, and every other part of his body was inflicted with several knife wounds. In the end, Lin Tianyi's knife slashed his right arm, and the pain caused the long sword in his hand to fall out. Such a scene caused everyone's expression to change. Emosen has lost, someone murmured. In the crowd, Xiaoyun's face became extremely pale, and her lips trembled. She could not understand how Lin Tian had become so terrifying in just a few days. Was this still the Lin Tian she knew? Stop! A loud shout was heard. Moe stood up from the high platform and rushed into the martial arts arena like lightning. Lin Tian's eyes flashed coldly. He grabbed Emosen's throat and used the yin and yang steps to retreat to a corner of the martial arts arena. The long saber in his hand was directly placed on Emosen's neck. Feeling the cold blade on his neck, Emosen's face was suddenly filled with horror. He said in a trembling voice, "Uncle, save me!" Seeing Emosen covered in bloody wounds, Moe's face became extremely gloomy. He stared at Lin Tian and said coldly, "You're so young, but you're so vicious!" Moe spat out this sentence, and at the same time, a tyrannical aura was released. It was very frightening. Chapter 14. Lin Tian felt an enormous pressure, and secretly thought that the elders of the Nine-Yang martial house were indeed terrifying. However, he was not afraid. The long saber in his hand pressed against Emosen's neck as he coldly looked at Moe on the other side of the stage and said, "Vicious? When Emosen used a martial technique to injure me, you did not react at all. Now that Emosen has been injured by me, you immediately jump out and say that I'm vicious. Elder Mo, you're really fair as an elder." His words were cold, and the sarcasm in his words could be felt by anyone. "Impudent! Is this the tone you use when speaking to an elder?" Moe shouted. Lin Tianling snorted. "I don't remember having an elder like you. Don't blow your own trumpet." Such words immediately caused an uproar among the examinees. This was blatantly contradicting an elder of the martial house. As expected, Moe's expression immediately turned cold. "Disobedient!" Moe took a step forward, and a terrifying aura instantly erupted from his body. This aura was very terrifying, causing many examinees to turn pale. Some could not help but tremble. However, Lin Tian's expression did not change at all. The long saber in his hand pressed down slightly, and blood immediately flowed out from Emosen's throat. "Stop! Stop!" Emosen screamed in fear. At this moment, he could clearly feel the skin on his throat being cut by Lin Tian's saber. If Lin Tian continued to exert force, his throat would be completely cut open. At that time, he would be dead for sure. Moe stopped and gloomily stared at Lin Tian. "Let him go!" Emosen was still in Lin Tian's hands, so he still had some misgivings. Lin Tianling smiled and said, "Elder Mo, I remember that at the beginning of the duel, Emosen proposed a life and death duel, and you were the first to agree. Furthermore, you said that during the duel, no one was allowed to interfere. So now you rushed into this stage. What is the meaning of this? Do you think your words are just farts?" Hiss! On the stage, all the examinees sucked in a breath of cold air. Did he think that he was just spouting nonsense? At this place, almost everyone was shocked. They secretly wondered why Lin Tian was so daring. That was an elder of the Nine-Yang martial house, a figure second only to the martial house master. How could this man dare to contradict him time and time again? The veins on Moe's forehead bulged. "You're courting death!" At this moment, a murderous aura was emitted from his body. "Courting death? I don't know whether I'm courting death or not, but I know that you and Emosen wanted me dead from the very beginning because my talent is higher than Emosen's, because my mental state is stronger than Emosen's, because I stole Emosen's limelight." Lin Tianling coldly looked at Moe and said sarcastically, Do you think that no one noticed your shady tricks during the drawing of lots? You knew that Emosen was in control of a martial skill and thought that Emosen's combat power was stronger than mine, so you purposely arranged Emosen and me together. After that, Emosen proposed a life and death battle to me, and you immediately agreed. You and Emosen both thought that you would definitely be able to kill me once you mastered a martial skill. Unfortunately, both of you miscalculated. You overestimated Emosen, and Emosen, this trash, overestimated himself. Therefore, the outcome deviated from your predictions. Therefore, you rushed into this martial arts stage now. Right, you shameless old bastard. Shameless old thing! These words resounded throughout the stage, causing everyone's expressions to change. Many people stared at Lin Tian, and their expressions changed again and again. They were all shocked by Lin Tian's sharp words. He repeatedly contradicted a martial house elder, and now, he even directly called him a shameless old thing. This was really too daring. Of course, there were also many people who stared at Moe and Emosen, and their expressions became strange. Thinking about it, Lin Tian's words were very likely. If this was really the case, then Moe, this martial house elder, was really too shameless. On the high platform not far away, Mu Qing and Sherdong looked at each other and smiled bitterly. This little guy, he clearly knows that this duel is a conspiracy, but he still dares to calmly accept the challenge. He really has great courage. On the stage, Mo Yi's face became incomparably gloomy. At this moment, if Emosen was not still in Lin Tian's hands, he would definitely pounce on Lin Tian and tear him apart. He stared at Lin Tian like a tiger staring at its prey, and the murderous aura on his body was even more shocking. Let him go immediately. If you dare to continue to hurt him, I guarantee that you won't be able to leave here alive today. I will crush your bones and scatter your ashes. Are you sure? Lin Tianling asked. Moe said coldly. Definitely. Lin Tian stared at Moe, and after a while, the long blade pressed against Emosen's neck slowly moved down. Emosen's entire body instantly relaxed when he saw this scene. But right after that, his eyes became sinister, and he laughed coldly at Lin Tian. Little bastard, just you wait. You can't defeat me. One day, I will crush you with my own hands. So noisy, Lin Tiantan said indifferently. He grabbed Emosen's neck and threw him towards Moe. At least you know what's good for you. Moe said coldly and stretched out his hand to catch Mo's senator on the high platform not far away. Mu Qing and Sherdong also breathed a sigh of relief. This ending was not bad, at least both of them survived. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. On the stage, Lin Tianling smiled, raised his leg, and kicked Emosen's sword away. Puff! The long sword cut through the air and stabbed into Emosen's chest, directly penetrating Emosen's heart. P.S. Thank you, Brother Hu, for supporting us again with 20,000 traversing coins. Thank you, Brother Pure Q, for supporting us with 10,000 traversing coins. Thank you. Chapter 15. Bright red blood sprinkled in the air, a ghastly sight to behold. Moe caught Emosen, but unfortunately, what he caught was only a corpse. With his heart pierced, Emosen died on the spot. On the martial arts practice field, everyone was stunned. Lin Tian actually killed Emosen in front of Moe. Bastard! Moe went berserk, his whole face twisted together. In an instant, Moe rushed out, a terrifying aura directly pressed down on Lin Tian. Old thing! Lin Tian had expected this scene, and immediately stepped back with the yin-yang steps, at the same time blocking in front of him with his long sword. Unfortunately, Mo Yi's speed was too fast. With a crack, the long sword in his hand was shattered by Mo Yi's palm, and he was also sent flying by a majestic force. While still in the air, he couldn't help but cough out a mouthful of blood. Bang! Falling to the ground, Lin Tian felt that his internal organs had shifted, and could only barely stand up. Now, he was powerless and had completely lost the ability to resist. As long as Moe hit him again, he would undoubtedly die. At this time, Moe had already pressed down on him again. Go to hell! However, at this time, two figures suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking Moe. Moe, what are you doing? These two figures were Mu Qing and Sherdong. Seeing someone blocking in front of him, Lin Tian suddenly felt the pressure on his body lighten a lot. Get out of the way! Moe shouted angrily. Mu Qing said in a deep voice. Moe, do you know what you are doing now? He killed Emosin, he deserves to die. Moe took a step forward. Sherdong frowned. Moe, don't forget, you were the one who agreed to this life-and-death battle. Although we are very sorry for Emosen's death, this child killed Emosen in a duel. You have no right to kill him. On the martial arts practice field, many candidates came back to their senses and looked at Lin Tian. Many people sucked in a cold breath. This guy, with a cultivation of the 3rd level of body refinement, fought against Emosen, who was at the 4th level of body refinement, and defeated and killed the opponent. He was simply a monster. At this time, seeing Moe take action against Lin Tian, many people began to feel indignant for Lin Tian, thinking that this elder Moe was simply too shameless. Move aside! Moe's eyes were bloodshot as he took another step forward. He stared at Lin Tian with a murderous aura. Mu Qing's face fell and he said, Elder Mo, remember your identity clearly. Pay attention to your words and actions. As an elder of the martial house, you are now representing the Nine-Yang martial house. Don't bring shame to the entire Nine-Yang martial house because of you. It was Emosen himself who proposed the life and death duel, and Moe himself agreed. Lin Tian killed Emosen in the duel fair and square. There was nothing wrong with this, not to mention that Emosen still had all the advantageous conditions. Here, many examinees had seen everything with their own eyes. If Moe killed Lin Tian here, then where would the Nine-Yang martial house put their face in the future? Moreover, through their previous observation, Mu Qing and Sherdong found that although Emosen's talent was extraordinary, his character was not good. It could even be described as terrible. They felt that Emosen's death was regrettable, but since Emosen was already dead, there was nothing they could do. On the other hand, Lin Tian was a 9-star talent with a firm will. His courage and courage were also exceptional. If such a genius died, it would be a great loss to the martial house. Therefore, no matter what, they had to protect Lin Tian. Mu Qing, Sherdong, are you two really going to protect this little bastard? Are you really going to be my enemy? Moe said coldly. Mu Qing and Sherdong did not speak, but they stood firmly in front of Lin Tian. The answer was self-evident. Good, good, good. Moe was so angry that he laughed. His entire body emitted a murderous aura as he stared at Lin Tian Dao. Consider yourself lucky today, you bastard. I will remember you. Mu Qing and Sherdong's cultivation was not inferior to his. Since the two of them were determined to protect Lin Tian, there was nothing he could do. He glanced coldly at Lin Tian, then wrapped up Emosen's body and left. Only when Moe was far away did the examinees finally heave a sigh of relief. Lin Tian also felt his body lighten. Immediately, he took a step back and bowed to Mu Qing and Sherdong. Many thanks to the two elders, he said sincerely. If not for the two of them protecting him, he might have really died in Moe's hands today. No need to thank us. This is what we should do. Mu Qing shook his head and looked at Lin Tian with a bitter smile. But you, little fellow, why did you really kill Emosen? Look at it now. That old fellow Moe will definitely be thinking about you and that Mog. Sigh. Mog is very strong. What about Moe? Lin Tian asked. Mog is at the 3rd tier of the Divine Vein realm, while Moe is at the 9th tier, Mu Qing said. Lin Tian frowned. Compared to the current him, the two of them were indeed very terrifying. Sherdong teased. Why, little fellow? Do you regret it? No. If I had to do it again, I would still kill him. Oh? Sherdong was a little surprised. You knew that killing Emosen would bring great trouble or even disaster, but you still insisted on killing him. This seems a little irrational. Why? Mu Qing also looked at Lin Tian, puzzled. Facing these two's gazes, Lin Tian appeared extremely calm. As a man, there are things that he cannot do, and things that he must do. Emotion threw him off the cliff and ordered people to humiliate Lin Shi. If he had the chance to kill such a person, why wouldn't he? Just because the other party had a powerful family background, he should swallow his anger? How could that be? Having lived 2 lives, he didn't come here to be a coward. Chapter 16. Mu Qing and Sherdong were both shocked as they looked at Lin Tian in disbelief. Good, good, good. What a good do not do, must do. Sherdong's eyes flickered. Sherdong and Mu Qing didn't know the exact enmity between Lin Tian and Mo's senator, however. Lin Tian's words caused their blood to boil, and it was as if they'd returned to their youth. Youth, I really miss it. Mu Qing sighed. Once upon a time, he was also young and hot-blooded like Lin Tian, but unfortunately, time couldn't go back. Lin Tian stood quietly in the same place. He didn't know what to say when the two sighed. Noticing Lin Tian's expression, Sherdong laughed. I'm sorry. The 3rd round of the assessment wasn't over yet, but Mu Qing and Sherdong didn't need to stay here any longer. The 2 of them came for Lin Tian, a 9-star talent. Now that the dust had settled, Lin Tian didn't disappoint them. Mu Qing told the middle-aged man to continue the assessment, then turned to Lin Tian Dao. Little guy, come with us. Lin Tian hesitated for a moment before he said, Elder, I still have a younger sister outside. Can you allow me to bring her over first? I just killed Emosen, and I'm afraid the Mo family will harm my sister. Of course, that's not a problem. Go. Mu Qing nodded. Thank you, Elder. Lin Tian bowed to express his gratitude. He was truly grateful to Mu Qing and Sherdong. Go, little guy, no need to be so polite. We'll wait for you in the disciple pavilion. Sherdong smiled. Lin Tian didn't hesitate, and immediately ran out of the martial house. Looking at his back, Mu Qing and Sherdong looked at each other and smiled, the satisfaction in their eyes becoming even stronger. Talent, will, courage, strength, etiquette, these few aspects are all impeccable and can be called perfect. In addition, he is a good brother who loves his little sister. Haha, it seems that we have really found a treasure this time. When Lin Tian brought Lin Shi back to the 9-yang martial house, Mu Qing and Sherdong had already arranged a place for him to stay. It was a small house, and although it was far from the destroyed Lin clan's old residence, the surrounding environment was not bad and was very quiet. Most importantly, this was the martial house, so it was very safe. Xiaoxi, don't go anywhere. Just stay in the house, okay? Brother will be back soon, he said to Lin Shi. Yes. Lin Shi nodded obediently. Lin Tian chuckled and pinched Lin Shi's cheeks. After closing the door, he walked towards the disciples' pavilion. The disciple pavilion was a special place in the 9-yang martial house. It was mainly responsible for collecting information about the martial house's disciples. At the same time, it was in charge of rewarding and punishing disciples. In short, the disciple pavilion was in charge of almost everything related to the martial house's disciples. When Lin Tian arrived at the disciple pavilion, there was a young girl standing at the entrance. She was about 16 years old, with bright eyes and 2 ponytails. She was much prettier than Xiaoyun. Are you Lin Tian? The young girl asked. Lin Tian stopped in his tracks and nodded. Then, he was a little puzzled. You are? This girl knew his name, which made him feel a little strange. The young girl giggled and said, My name is Sushu. Master asked me to wait for you here. Master? Your master is? Lin Tian's heart skipped a beat. Mu Qing and Sherdong asked him to come here to find them. Could it be that this young girl's master was one of them? Old man Mu, you know who he is, right? Sushu said. Old man Mu? Mu Qing? Lin Tian suddenly blushed with shame. This beautiful girl seemed to be a little naughty. P.S. Thank you, Brother Tiger, for supporting me with 10,000 traversing coins. Thank you, dear 199519995, for supporting me with 10,000 traversing coins. Thank you, brother Mija, for supporting me with 10,000 traversing coins. Thank you to Pliers 2, Lemon Chichi, Book Friend 130622925, A3100399047, One Shot at Loss, SAI 9 Heavens, Help King U, and other book friends for their enthusiastic support. Thank you, everyone. Chapter 17. When Lin Tian followed Sushu to a room on the second floor of the Disciples' Pavilion, Mu Qing and Sherdong were drinking tea. Seeing Sushu bring Lin Tian over, both of them smiled slightly. Little guy, is your sister settled down? Mu Qing asked. Lin Tian nodded and said gratefully, She's settled down. Thank you for your concern. Mu Qing smiled and shook his head, indicating that he was welcome. Seniors, why did you call me here? Lin Tian asked. Sherdong and Mu Qing looked at each other and smiled. Actually, it's nothing special. There are 2 things for you. Mu Qing took out a small green bag and handed it to Lin Tian. One of them is your identity jade token as a disciple of the martial house. It records your personal information. The other is the 9 Chu quintessence pill, which is your reward for first place in this comprehensive assessment. Mu Qing said. Lin Tian was about to thank him, but Sushu next to him widened her eyes. 9 Chu quintessence pill? 9 Chu quintessence pill is? Lin Tian asked Sushu in a low voice. He had only been in contact with martial arts for a few days, so there were many things he was not very clear about. Seeing Sushu so surprised after hearing these words, he suddenly became a little curious. Sushu looked at Lin Tian as if she was looking at a monster. You actually don't know about the 9 Chu quintessence pill? I don't know. Lin Tian was very honest. He really didn't know. Sushu was speechless for a while. She stretched out her index finger and gently poked Lin Tian's forehead. Like an elder, she said, The 9 Chu quintessence pill is made from the 9 Du root, red chu grass, the bone marrow of the 4th level wind fire rhinoceros, and several other herbs. Not only can it improve the physique, but it can also improve the cultivation of martial artists. It's very precious. Very precious? Lin Tian thought for a moment and asked. How much is it worth? This is a treasure. You can't buy it even if you have money. Sushu rolled her eyes. You can't buy it even if you have money? Lin Tian was a little surprised. It seemed that this thing was really precious. He looked at Mu Qing and the other 2 and thanked them again. No need to be so courteous. This is the reward you deserve. Sherdong waved his hand. The 2 of them chatted with Lin Tian for a while, then got up and left. As elders of the martial house, they had a lot of work to do, so they had to return to the elder pavilion. Little Shu, bring Lin Tian around the martial house. Mu Qing instructed. After that, he and Sherdong walked out. You really know how to order people around. Sushu snorted in dissatisfaction. But even so, she didn't refuse. As soon as the 2 of them left, she walked out with Lin Tian. The 9 Yang martial house occupied a large area. Lin Tian followed behind Sushu and listened to the young girl's introduction. Soon, he had a vague understanding of the 9 Yang martial house. Oh right, what's your current cultivation? Sushu suddenly asked. Lin Tian didn't understand, but he didn't hide it and said, 3rd layer of body refinement. 3rd layer of body refinement. Sushu thought for a while, then smiled and said, How about this, we'll stop here for today. You go back first and absorb the 9 twists essence pill tonight. If nothing unexpected happens, I think you should be able to reach the 4th layer of body refinement. After that, I'll accompany you to the martial pavilion to choose a cultivation method and martial skill. The 9 Yang martial house was divided into 6 parts: the elder pavilion, the martial pavilion, the disciple pavilion, the lecture area, the martial practice field, and the disciple dormitory. The martial pavilion was where the 9 Yang martial house stored their cultivation methods and martial skills. Why don't you choose now? Lin Tian was curious. He looked around, and it seemed that they weren't too far from the Martial Pavilion. The Martial House's cultivation methods for the body refinement realm are all about the same, so there are no requirements. Sushu patiently explained. As for martial skills, there are differences. The Martial House's disciples have a chance to choose a martial skill every 3 small realms. For example, from the first layer of body refinement to the third layer of body refinement, you can choose a martial skill. From the 4th layer of body refinement to the 6th layer of body refinement, you can choose another martial skill, and so on. Of course, every cultivation level has a strict division of the martial skills. You can't choose a martial skill that exceeds your cultivation level. You're currently at the 3rd layer of body refinement, so after refining the 9 Twists Essence Pill, you can definitely reach the 4th layer of body refinement. At that time, it won't be too late to choose a cultivation method and martial skill, saving you the trouble of running around again. Lin Tian was enlightened. What he said was indeed quite reasonable. Okay, we'll do as you say, he said. This is a sound-transmitting talisman. Once you input your true essence, speak to it, and I'll be able to hear it. Sushu handed a sound-transmitting talisman to Lin Tian, then waved her hand and said, Then that's it. I still have some matters to attend to. See you tomorrow, little Tian Tian. After she finished speaking, the girl ran off like the wind. Lin Tian raised his hand, preparing to say goodbye, but he was choked by the way Sushu addressed him. Little Tian Tian? He blushed with shame and was speechless for a long time. Chapter 18. After bidding farewell to Sushu, Lin Tian did not wander around the Martial House and quickly returned to his residence. Not long after, the curtain of night fell. After Lin Shi fell asleep, Lin Tian went to the roof of the hut and took out the 9 Melody Quintessence pill from the pouch that Mu Qin gave him. This pill was reddish-gold in color and faintly emitted a fragrance. Begin! Lin Tian took a deep breath and carefully put the pill into his mouth. The pill melted in his mouth like a gentle spring, flowing down Lin Tian's throat into his stomach. After a quarter of an hour, Lin Tian felt his body heat up. It was as if a flame had ignited in his body, and the burning sensation quickly spread throughout his body. His body gradually became boiling hot, and his exposed skin became a fiery red. Now is the time! Lin Tian knew that the pill was beginning to take effect. He immediately operated the 4 Extremes Meridian and refined the pill's spirit energy that rushed into his body. 1. A faint brilliance circulated on the surface of his body, illuminating the dark roof of the hut a little. Gradually, Lin Tian became alarmed. He felt as if there was a spirit energy volcano erupting in his body. The rich spirit energy seemed to want to rush through his body, and the terrifying heat seemed to want to completely melt him. At this moment, the pill's spirit energy filled every corner of his body. What a good 9 Melody Quintessence pill, worthy of a priceless treasure! He secretly thought in his heart. As his body became increasingly hot, Lin Tian did not dare to be careless. He operated the 4 Extremes Meridian with all his heart, quickly guiding the pill's spirit energy into his flesh and blood. He used this pure spirit energy to temper his flesh and blood over and over again. 2 hours later, Lin Tian suddenly shook. At this moment, he had reached the 4th layer of body refinement. At this time, there was still a lot of pill's spirit energy in his body, like a hunting dragon roaming around. Continue to cultivate! The 4 Extremes Meridian continued to operate. For a treasure like the 9 Melody Quintessence pill, Lin Tian did not want to waste a single bit. However, this time, it was different from before. This time, he did not simply guide the spirit energy into his flesh and blood. Instead, he used his true essence to guide the spirit energy into his muscles and bones. Tempering his muscles and bones. It hurts! In an instant, Lin Tian's body trembled as he felt intense pain. In the 9 layers of body refinement, the first 3 layers tempered the flesh and blood, the middle 3 layers tempered the bones and tendons, and the last 3 layers tempered the internal organs. Lin Tian had now reached the 4th layer of body refinement, and immediately began to use his true essence to guide the spirit energy to temper his tendons and bones. However, tempering the tendons and bones was much more difficult than tempering the flesh and blood, and the tempering process was several times more painful than tempering the flesh and blood. At this moment, Lin Tian felt as if there were sharp blades cutting into his meridians, as if there were heavy hammers hammering into his bones. That kind of tearing pain almost caused him to roar out loud, as beads of cold sweat dripped down from his forehead. Although martial artists are very impressive, the process of cultivation is simply a living hell, Lin Tian cursed inwardly. Although he said this, he did not stop his cultivation. Instead, he became even more serious. True essence guided the spirit energy to temper the tendons and bones, causing the tendons and bones to become tough and sturdy. The martial artist's strength would also greatly increase. Not only that, at this stage, a portion of the true essence would remain within the tendons and bones, forming a small cycle with the true essence in the flesh and blood. Thus, the martial artist's blood and endurance would greatly increase. Lin Tianyi repeatedly operated the 4 extreme meridians. Although it was extremely painful, he endured it. Gradually, his skin became normal, and was no longer as red as before. After another 8 hours, the darkness dispersed, and the light of dawn sprinkled on the earth. Lin Tian opened his eyes, exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, and then stood up. He clenched his fists and moved his body. He felt that his whole body was much more relaxed. His hearing became sharper, and his vision became clearer. It was as if his whole body had an inexhaustible amount of strength. 5th layer of body refinement. Lin Tian was secretly pleasantly surprised. A night of cultivation actually allowed him to directly step into the 5th layer of body refinement from the 3rd layer of body refinement. This was a huge improvement. One had to know that from the 3rd layer of body refinement to the 5th layer of body refinement, many people spent a year's time. But today, he did it in a single night. How could he not be pleasantly surprised? At the same time, this also made Lin Tian more aware of the preciousness of the 9 Twists Essence Pill. I can go choose a martial skill now. After a moment of excitement, Lin Tian thought of the matter of choosing a martial skill, and his eyes suddenly lit up. He took out a sound transmission talisman, inserted true essence into it, and began to contact Sushu. P.S. Thank you Weiwei for 20,000 horizontal coins. Thank you Bing Qingqingqiu for 10,000 horizontal coins. Thank you 2 rich people. Chapter 19. On the way to the martial pavilion, Sushu puffed up her cheeks and angrily glared at Lin Tian. She was still sleeping when Lin Tian used a sound transmission talisman to disturb her dreams. Sorry, I was too impatient, Lin Tian said awkwardly. His biggest goal in coming to the Nine-Yang martial house was martial skills. After an entire night of cultivation, he had reached the 5th layer of body refinement. Thinking that he was going to pick a martial skill, he was naturally excited and impatient. Sushu pointed at Lin Tian and snorted. Sleep is very important to girls, especially beautiful girls like me. If I don't sleep well, my skin will deteriorate. Little Tian, you have committed a great crime today. Lin Tian blushed with shame and repeatedly said yes. This girl was not only mischievous, but also narcissistic. He followed behind Sushu and soon arrived in front of the martial scripture pavilion. Raising his head, he saw that the martial scripture pavilion was divided into 3 levels. It gave off an ancient and majestic feeling. You go in by yourself, I will wait for you outside, Sushu said. Lin Tian nodded and walked in. After entering, he handed the jade token to the martial pavilion elder and quietly waited. Before coming here, he had already gone to the disciple pavilion to update his information. The martial pavilion elder casually probed with his chi and was slightly surprised. He immediately said to Lin Tian now. 5th layer of body refinement. Not bad. Go to the 2nd floor. You can pick a body refinement cultivation technique, a low-grade body refinement martial skill, and a mid-grade body refinement martial skill. You have 2 hours to pick. The grades of martial arts techniques were generally divided according to their realms. They were the body refinement grade martial arts techniques, the divine vein grade martial arts techniques, the sea of knowledge grade martial arts techniques, and the flight grade martial arts techniques. Each grade of martial arts technique was further divided into 3 levels from weak to strong, low, medium, and high. As for cultivation techniques, they were basically the same as martial skills. The ranks of the cultivation techniques in the 9-yang martial house were almost the same, so there was no distinction. "Thank you, Elder." Lin Tian took the jade identity card and walked up to the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor was lined with rows upon rows of bookshelves. The bookshelves were filled with all kinds of cultivation methods and martial skills. Lin Tian was a little dazzled. Chilling Ice Slash. 9 slashes. Each slash contains the power of chilling ice. Each slash is stronger than the previous one. Cloud Breaking Leg. The leg breaks the clouds, its destructive power is incomparably strong. Overlord Saber Technique, firm, fierce, and sharp. One saber strike can shatter rocks and split the earth. Lin Tian flipped through the martial skills on the bookshelf, then put them down. Choosing a martial arts technique was very important. Firstly, it had to be suitable for oneself. Secondly, it had to be powerful enough. Therefore, Lin Tian naturally would not be careless. As he walked past rows of bookshelves, his eyes suddenly lit up. Shocking Wind Sword Technique, a mid-grade body refinement martial skill. Its attack is extremely fierce, with speed as its core. When cultivated to the peak, the sword is like lightning, and can even cut apart the wind in the natural world. It could even cut through the wind? Lin Tian's heart skipped a beat. This is it! After another half an hour of searching, Lin Tian saw a martial arts technique called Shadow Fire Fist. It was a low-grade body refinement martial skill, suitable for close combat. This set of martial arts technique was divided into 2 levels. The first level was called Shadow Fist, and the second level was called Fire Fist. The Shadow Fist could create a sky full of true Yuan Fist shadows, while the Fire Fist could create flames in the fist shadows. I have cultivated the duality steps. Together with the Shadow Fire Fist, the effect should be pretty good. Lin Tian thought to himself. In the end, Lin Tian chose the Shocking Wind Sword Technique and the Shadow Fire Fist. After that, he casually chose a martial arts technique manual and walked down to the 2nd floor. He already had a top-grade body refinement martial arts technique, the 4 Extremes Scripture. In fact, he did not fancy the martial arts techniques of the 9-yang martial house. The reason why he chose a martial arts technique here was to deceive others. Elder, these are the martial arts techniques and martial arts techniques that I have chosen. He came to the 1st floor and passed the martial arts techniques that he had chosen to the Martial Pavilion Elder. The Martial Pavilion Elder glanced at them and revealed a strange expression when he saw the Shocking Wind Sword Technique. However, he did not say anything. After registering them, he returned the martial arts techniques and martial arts techniques to Lin Tian. Return them within 10 days. You may go. Lin Tian put away the martial arts techniques and martial arts techniques. He gave a simple bow and immediately left the martial pavilion. After walking out of the martial pavilion, Sushu immediately came over to him. Have you chosen? I have chosen. Let me see. Sushu looked at the martial arts techniques that Lin Tian had chosen and immediately frowned. Oh, the Shadow Fire Fist is not bad, but this Shocking Wind Sword technique is not too good. Not too good? It can't be, right? I took a look. The power described is not bad. Lin Tian was curious. Sushu rolled her eyes and said, the power is indeed not bad. It is not an exaggeration to call it the strongest martial arts technique of the refining realm. However, although it is strong, the difficulty of cultivating it is shockingly high. After so many years, there has never been a disciple in the martial house who has cultivated this sword technique to perfection. Now, there is no one who would choose this martial arts technique. Lin Tian was speechless. He finally understood why the Martial Pavilion Elder had a strange expression when he saw the martial arts technique that he had chosen. What should I do? Once a martial arts technique is chosen, it cannot be changed. Sushu was a little annoyed. Ah. I should have told you in advance. Lin Tian did not mind at all. Instead, he comforted Sushu and said with a smile, "It's okay. Others can't cultivate it, but it doesn't mean that I can't. If it were me, I would definitely be able to cultivate it to perfection." Sushu curled her lips. "I didn't expect you to be so arrogant." "It's not arrogance, it's self-confidence." Lin Tian smiled and corrected her. He then said, "Oh right, Sushu, where should I go to cultivate this martial arts technique?" Cultivation techniques could be cultivated in one's own residence. As for martial arts techniques, it was impossible. Martial arts techniques were used for battle and could not be cultivated in a house. Martial arts practice field or Greenwind Ridge. Greenwind Ridge is? Lin Tian was curious. He knew about the martial arts practice field, but he did not know what Greenwind Ridge was. Sushu patiently explained. Greenwind Ridge is behind the Nine Suns martial house. It is a huge forest filled with demonic beasts. It is a place where the disciples of the martial house train themselves. It is also an excellent place to cultivate martial arts. However, I suggest that you cultivate in the martial arts practice field first. After all, the martial arts practice field is 100% safe. However, the demonic beasts in Greenwind Ridge are extremely ferocious. If you are not skilled enough, you might be seriously injured or even die. Lin Tian thought for a moment and said, "Okay, then let's go to Greenwind Ridge." The path of martial arts was full of thorns. If one was afraid of injury or death, then what was the point of cultivating martial arts? A martial artist must press forward with indomitable will. You rascal. Sushu was helpless. She originally wanted to persuade Lin Tian, but after seeing Lin Tian's determined eyes, she immediately dispelled the thought in her heart. "Let's go. I will bring you to the entrance of Greenwind Ridge." "Thanks." Lin Tian smiled. Although this girl was a little mischievous and narcissistic, she was very good to him. He was very grateful. He followed behind Sushu and walked towards an unfamiliar place. At this moment, 3 men walked towards them. The one in the lead was dressed in gold. After seeing Sushu, his face revealed a smile. "What a coincidence, little Shu. I haven't seen you for a few days and you have become more beautiful." "Zhou Hao, who allowed you to call me little Shu? I am not familiar with you." Sushu was a little unhappy. The man in gold was called Zhou Hao. He was the son of Supervisor Feng. His cultivation was at the 9th level of the body refinement realm. He was extremely strong and was deeply respected and feared by the disciples of the Nine Sun martial house. Zhou Hao smiled. Suddenly, he saw Lin Tian beside Sushu and frowned. "Little Shu, who is this person?" "I have no comment," Sushu said. Zhou Hao shook his head. He smiled and walked towards Sushu. In a gentle voice he said, "That's right, little Shu. My father is holding a family banquet tonight. I told him about us and he liked it very much. He asked me to invite you to be a guest at his residence tonight." Sushu was even more unhappy. "What do you mean by us?" "Zhoujing, there is nothing between you and me. I have already said many times that I will not like you. There is not even a 1 in 10,000 chance. Stop bothering me." Zhou Hao's eyes flashed with a sinister light. However, he maintained a smile on his face. "Don't say that. I believe that my sincerity will definitely move you. All right, let's not talk about this first. The family banquet is about to start. We have to hurry over." As he spoke, Zhou Hao raised his hand and pulled Sushu. Just then, another hand reached out from the side and grabbed his wrist. Lin Tian stood out and smiled. "Didn't you hear clearly? She said that she does not like you and that you should stop bothering her. P.S. Thank you for supporting us with 10,000 renminbi. Thank you." Chapter 20. Lin Tian didn't like to meddle in other people's business, but Sushu was different. This girl was very good to him. Now that she was in trouble, since he was standing here, How could he just stand by and watch? Looking at Lin Tian's back blocking in front of her, Sushu's eyes flashed with a strange light. This guy, she muttered in a low voice. Her voice was very soft. Lin Tian didn't hear it, and Zhou Hao couldn't hear it either. At this moment, Lin Tian grabbed Zhou Hao's wrist. Zhou Hao's face sank. The true essence in his body exploded, turning into a powerful force that pressed down on Lin Tian. You dare to meddle in the matter between us? The matter between you two? Lin Tian's expression was calm. From the beginning to the end, it seems like you've been thinking too much. There's nothing between the two of you. From the beginning to the end, you've only been harassing her. Zhou Hao's aura was very strong. However, after that strange dream, after enduring the killing intent of Moe and the other divine pulse experts, Lin Tian could completely resist Zhou Hao's aura. He let go of Zhou Hao's hand and said indifferently, "It's better for people to have some face." What did you say? Zhou Hao's eyes turned cold. You don't understand? Leave some face for yourself. Don't ask for a snub, Lin Tian said. Ask for a snub? Are you talking about yourself? Zhou Hao's face became even colder. He stared at Lin Tian. He raised his right hand and suddenly waved it. With a ping sound, a large boulder exploded not far away. I've been practicing martial arts since I was young. My father is Supervisor Feng and is now in the 9th layer of body refinement. What are you? A commoner in the 5th layer of body refinement. With this kind of strength, you dare to stop me? Who is the one asking for a snub? He took a step forward and stared at Lin Tian. He said coldly, as a person, you should have some self-awareness. There are some positions that you can't stand on just because you want to. There are some people that you can't afford to offend. If it wasn't for Little Shu, you wouldn't even have the qualifications to talk to me. Do you understand? If you understand, then disappear from Shu's side immediately. Lin Tian's attitude made him very uncomfortable, and Lin Tian's words made him even more displeased. At this moment, he displayed his strength and family background in order to give Lin Tian a show of strength. He wanted to embarrass Lin Tian and make Lin Tian retreat. Zhou Hao's words were overbearing, and Sushu was very unhappy. Zhou Hao, you didn't create this family, so you don't deserve to be proud of it. As for cultivation, you've only cultivated for 2 years more than Lin Tian, so there's nothing to be proud of. If you were given the same amount of time to cultivate, you would be far inferior to Lin Tian. Sushu had learned from Mu Qing that Lin Tian had a 9-star talent. A martial artist with this level of talent was a monstrous genius. If they had cultivated for the same amount of time, Zhou Hao would absolutely not be able to compare to Lin Tian. I can't compare to him? After being repeatedly criticized by Sushu, Zhou Hao's face finally became somewhat gloomy. Good. Since you say so, then I'll have a match with him. He looked at Lin Tian and coldly said, 3 months from now, the Nianyang Martial House will hold the annual Inner Palace Disciple Selection Competition. At that time, you and I will have a match. The loser will cripple his own cultivation and limbs. Do you dare? Sushu's face changed. She stood out and said, Zhou Hao, what do you mean by this? You've already entered the martial house for 2 years, and your cultivation is at the 9th layer of body refinement. Lin Tian has just entered the martial house, and his cultivation is only at the 5th layer of body refinement. You propose a match at this time, and there are only 3 months left. How can Lin Tian catch up to you? Lin Tian had a 9-star talent, and could be called a monster. But even a monster needed time to cultivate. If there wasn't enough time, how could he become strong? Especially from the 5th layer of body refinement to the 9th layer of body refinement, the difficulty was astonishing. The first 5 layers of body refinement simply couldn't compare. This was also the main reason why once a martial artist reached the 5th layer of body refinement, they must have a cultivation method to continue on the path of martial arts. With only 3 months, even if it was a 9-star talent monster, it was absolutely impossible to go from the 5th layer of body refinement to the 9th layer of body refinement. Little Shu, I just want you to know that your way of thinking is wrong. He is not worthy of being compared to me, Zhou Hao said. Then he turned his head and coldly looked at Lin Tian. You're called Lin Tian, right? If you're a man, then don't hide behind a woman. Do you dare to accept the match? If you don't dare, then immediately get out of my sight. You! Su Shu was furious. At this time, a hand reached out from behind her and pulled her back. Lin Tian stared at Zhou Hao and indifferently said, In 3 months, I'll see you at the martial arts practice field. He looked at Zhou Hao, his face calm, without a change in expression. Zhou Hao also stared at Lin Tian, his eyes becoming even colder. Very good. In 3 months, I'll wait to see you cripple your own cultivation. After a moment, Zhou Hao coldly snorted, looked deeply at Lin Tian, and turned to leave. On the way to Greenwind Ridge, Su Shu looked at Lin Tian with a face full of resentment. You rascal, why did you agree? There's only 3 months, you won't be able to catch up to Zhou Hao. Lin Tian smiled and didn't mind. Although Su Shu was complaining on the way here, he knew that she was worried about him. You're still smiling? Seeing Lin Tian smile, Su Shu was even more furious. Lin Tian couldn't help but roll his eyes. What else can I do if I don't smile? Do you want me to cry? Or do you want me to admit defeat in front of Zhou Hao, then disappear from your sight with my tail between my legs? If I really do that, the next time we meet, you'll definitely slap me to death. Su Shu thought for a moment and said, That's true. Lin Tian. The entrance to Greenwind Ridge was relatively close to the Elder Pavilion. After a quarter of an hour, Su Shu brought Lin Tian here. As far as the eye could see, there was a towering stone door in front of them. On both sides of the stone door, there were 2 martial house deacons guarding it. Be careful. After you go in, don't try to show off. Just find a place to cultivate at the edge. Su Shu warned. Lin Tian nodded. After taking a few steps, he stopped. By the way, Su Shu, there's something I want to ask of you. Lin Tian turned around and looked at Su Shu. I'm going inside to cultivate. It'll probably take a long time. Can I trouble you to go and take care of my sister? She's not familiar with this place. Su Shu was slightly stunned. She was a little surprised. I heard that this guy didn't even blink when he killed Emo's son from the Emo family. I didn't expect him to be so gentle to his sister. She muttered to herself. What are you talking about? Lin Tian was a little curious. Su Shu's voice was too soft, so he didn't hear it clearly. Su Shu quickly shook her head. Nothing, nothing. You go, leave the matter of my sister to me. Okay, then I'll have to trouble you. Lin Tian smiled. He waved his hand at Su Shu and handed his identity jade token to the deacons guarding the door. Then he stepped in. Looking at the direction in which Lin Tian disappeared, Su Shu was lost in thought. Speaking of which, when that guy blocked Zhou Hao in front of me, he was quite handsome. She muttered softly. The terrain of Greenwind Ridge was very complicated. It was a paradise for demonic beasts. After bidding farewell to Su Shu, Lin Tian entered the primitive forest through the stone gate. Walking in the ancient forest, he was shocked. The old trees were too thick. Looking around, he casually picked one and found that its diameter was more than 2 meters. Lin Tian shook his head and muttered to himself. It's more important to find a suitable place to cultivate. Greenwind Ridge covered a large area. Walking in it, he could hear the roars of demonic beasts from time to time. In the distance, he could see many disciples of the martial house. It was obvious that they were also here to train. Lin Tian didn't go deep into Greenwind Ridge. Instead, he found a hidden and wide grassland at the edge. Huff. Lin Tian exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. He began to operate the 4 extremes scripture. Suddenly, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth rushed in from all directions. It was like a layer of light cocoon wrapped around his body like a dense fog. After a quarter of an hour, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth stabilized. Lin Tian opened his eyes again. It's done, he muttered to himself. Before a martial artist cultivated, it was best to maintain their essence, energy, and spirit at the peak. Lin Tian operated the four extremes scripture for a quarter of an hour and finally adjusted his body to the best state. Standing up, Lin Tian's expression was solemn as he yelled, "Shadow Fire Fist!" Lin Tian clenched his hands into fists and waved them rhythmically. The air around him buzzed from time to time. He punched again and again until he was drenched in sweat. After a short rest, he began to cultivate again. Bang! 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 On this grassland, Lin Tian was not only swinging his fists at the air, he was also enduring the pain and smashing his fists at the old tree beside him. His fists landed on the sturdy old tree trunk one after another, the ends of his fists even drawing blood. Soon 4 hours passed. In these 4 hours, Lin Tian didn't know how many punches he had thrown. It was also at this time that he felt his fists become scorching hot, as if they were wrapped in a ball of flame. The true essence in his body felt like it was about to burst out. This made his heart tremble, and 2 bright lights flashed in his eyes. Shadow Fire Fist! He let out a shout and swung his right fist out. With a boom, 3 fist shadows appeared, mixed with vigorous true essence, and landed directly on the old tree in front of him. With a crisp crack, a small part of the tough old tree trunk exploded, and wood shavings flew in all directions. Lin Tianwei smiled. After 4 hours, I finally touched the edge of the first layer. The Shadow Fire Fist was a low-grade body refining realm martial skill. It was divided into 2 layers. The first layer was the Shadow Fist. When cultivated to the highest level, one could throw out 18 fist shadows at once. It was very powerful. The second layer was the Fire Fist. The Fire Fist could make the fist shadows of the first layer produce flames, and its power was extraordinary. Lin Tianji used 4 hours to touch the first layer of the Shadow Fist realm, and threw out 3 fist shadows. It had to be said that this cultivation speed was very abnormal. However, Lin Tian was not satisfied with this. There were many experts in the Nine-Yang martial house, and he was very clear that he was still far from them. Take Zhou Hao for example. Zhou Hao was far stronger than him. I have to work harder, Lin Tian said to himself. He took a deep breath, clenched his hands into fists, and began to cultivate again. Chapter 21. Since he had already touched upon the first stage of the Shadow Fire Fist, the rest of the training would be much easier. On this grassland, Lin Tian continuously punched, and the number of fist shadows in the air slowly increased. After another 2 hours, he was finally able to throw out 18 fist shadows at once, reaching perfection of the first stage of the Shadow Fire Fist. First stage, 18 fist shadows, not bad. Lin Tian revealed a trace of a smile. He wiped off the sweat on his forehead, sat down cross-legged, and operated the 4 extremes meridians to recover his true yuan. Practicing martial arts consumed a lot of true yuan. In these 3 hours, Lin Tianyi had been practicing non-stop, so his true yuan consumption was naturally very serious. He operated the 4 extremes meridians for half an hour before standing up again. Putting away the Shadow Fire Fist manual, Lin Tian took out the Shocking Wind Sword Art manual. The Shocking Wind Sword Art was a mid-level body refining martial arts technique, 1 level higher than the Shadow Fire Fist. It was divided into 3 styles, namely the first style, Sword of Annihilation, the second style, Sword of Lightning, and the third style, Shocking Wind Sword. The Sword of Annihilation, the sword she was like a blade of light, cutting through everything. The Sword of Lightning, the sword was as fast as lightning, thundering like thunder, killing with 1 strike. The Shocking Wind Sword was also a perfect sword. The sword momentum was faster than lightning, and when the sword was thrown out, the sword's shadows would fill the sky. It was said that even the wind in nature could be cut in half. What a powerful sword technique! Lin Tian secretly said in his heart. He put away the Shocking Wind Sword Art manual, and then closed his eyes. Suddenly sword shadows appeared in his mind, forming a set of sharp sword moves, cycling repeatedly. This was the first style of the Shocking Wind Sword Art, sword of annihilation. After 2 hours, Lin Tian opened his eyes and stood up. Because he came out in a hurry, he didn't bring a sword with him, so he had to walk to the side and break off a branch to use as a sword. He squatted down slightly, and a light flashed in his eyes as he directly slashed out. 1! As he waved his right hand, the branch in his hand trembled, and the air screamed. A silver sword blade shot out from the tip of the branch in his hand, and with a crack, it pierced through a huge rock not far away. Then, the huge rock exploded with a boom. So strong! Lin Tian was a little excited. Just the first sword of the elementary insight stage is already much stronger than the great accomplishment stage of the Shadow Fist. If I can cultivate the first style of the Sword of Annihilation to the great accomplishment stage, wouldn't it be comparable to the second stage of the Shadow Fire Fist? How terrifying would the other two sword moves be? Putting away his excitement, Lin Tian took a deep breath and began to cultivate again. Buzz! 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 On the open grassland, the sound of the blade cutting through the air was constantly heard. Lin Tian held the branch in his hand and repeatedly practiced the first move of the Sword of Annihilation. He didn't stop until he was covered in sweat. This process took 3 hours. In 3 hours, Lin Tian had cultivated the first move, Sword of Destruction, to the great accomplishment realm. Strange, it doesn't seem that difficult to cultivate, Lin Tian muttered to himself. He knew from Sushu that the shocking wind sword art was extremely difficult to cultivate. Just the first move, Sword of Annihilation, would take an average person a month to cultivate to the great accomplishment stage. However, he had only used 6 hours to cultivate it, which made him feel a little strange. Lin Tian didn't know that the reason why his cultivation speed was so fast was because after he transmigrated, his soul and the soul of the original owner of this body merged together. His soul power was much stronger than ordinary people, which was why his cultivation speed was twice as fast with half the effort. Moreover, his 9-star talent was also related to this. Shaking his head, Lin Tian didn't think too much about it. After a short rest, he continued to cultivate. In the blink of an eye, the sky gradually darkened. Lin Tian stopped cultivating and looked up at the sky. He muttered to himself, "Let's call it a day." Wiping off the sweat on his forehead and patting the dust off his body, Lin Tian followed the path he came from and walked towards the Nine-Yang martial house. Not long after, a huge stone door appeared in his vision. It was the door he had stepped through when he entered the Greenwind Ridge. "We're here." Lin Tian smiled faintly and quickened his pace. At this moment, 2 young men suddenly appeared in front of him and blocked his path. These 2 young men were about 18 years old. One was dressed in green, and the other was dressed in brocade. Their cultivation was at the peak of the 5th firmament of body refinement. Lin Tian recognized these 2 people. They were the 2 men who followed Zhou Hao in the early morning. "What do you want?" Lin Tian said indifferently. "What do we want?" The green-clothed man and the brocade man looked at each other. They looked at Lin Tian with a playful expression. "Why do you think we brothers are waiting here? To treat you to a meal? Speaking of which, you have quite the guts. You know that young Master Zhou is interested in young Lady Su. When he told you to get lost, you still shamelessly stayed by young Lady Su's side. What an idiot!" The green-clothed man sneered. The 2 men shook their heads and looked at Lin Tian with a playful expression. "Brat, although young Master Zhou has agreed to a duel with you in 3 months, the matter of you offending young Master Zhou can't be forgotten. We have to teach you a lesson." The brocade man walked towards Lin Tian and said, "Stay here obediently and don't move. We will only break one of your arms. If you dare to resist, you will probably break another leg." This person's expression was relaxed. He did not put Lin Tian in his eyes at all. Lin Tian laughed involuntarily. "Even the master is not in a hurry. You dogs are quite cheerful." The brocade man's footsteps stopped, and his face darkened. "What did you say?" The brocade man stared coldly at Lin Tian. Lin Tian dared to call them dogs. "What I mean is that a dog should behave like a dog. When the master doesn't speak, a good dog should lie down obediently." Lin Tiantan said calmly. The brocade man and the green-clothed man's faces suddenly became cold. You are courting death. The brocade man shouted coldly and slapped Lin Tian. Lin Tian moved to the side slightly, and he was swift like the wind as he kicked the man's lower abdomen. Bang! The man was blasted flying on the spot, and he collided fiercely with an old tree not too far away. You dare to fight back? The green-clothed man's face darkened. He clenched his claws and pressed towards Lin Tian. Suddenly, Lin Tian felt a sharp breath coming towards him. It was as if an eagle had shown its sharp claws, sharp and threatening. He took a step back and kicked a big stone at his feet. Ghost Wolf Claw! The green-clothed man shouted. He didn't dodge and smashed the big stone into pieces. After that, the green-clothed man rushed towards Lin Tian like a demon wolf. He clenched his hands into claws and looked very cold. Lin Tianwei narrowed his eyes and clenched his right hand. Shadow Fist. He let out a low roar and punched out. Instantly 18 fist shadows flew towards the green-robed man. Insignificant skill. The green-clothed man snorted. He waved his hands and there were claw prints in the air, shattering Lin Tian's 18 fist shadows in the blink of an eye. At this time, the brocade-clothed man stood up and his face became a little ferocious. Break both of his hands. With a clang, the brocade-clothed man pulled out a long saber from behind and slashed towards Lin Tian. Lin Tian narrowed his eyes. He recognized this saber technique. It was the Overlord saber technique that he saw in the martial arts pavilion. It was a mid-level body refining technique. He looked at the green-clothed man. It seemed that the Ghost Wolf Claw was also a mid-level body refining technique. He waved the Shadow Fire Fist and used the yin-yang steps to move between the two of them with ease. For a moment, even if the green-clothed man and the brocade-clothed man used their mid-level body refining techniques together, it was difficult for them to touch Lin Tian. Stinky rat. Do you only know how to dodge? The brocade-clothed man was furious. The azure-clothed man's eyes were also filled with fury. Both of their cultivations were slightly higher than Lin Tian's, and at this moment, they had displayed a middle-rank body refinement martial skill. However, they were unable to suppress Lin Tian in the first instant. Their faces turned ugly. Dodge? Lin Tian smiled indifferently. He was just experimenting on these two people to see how well he could combine the Shadow Fire Fist and the yin-yang steps. At this moment, hearing the brocade-clothed man's words, the corner of his mouth hooked up into a sneer. He withdrew his fist and picked up a withered branch from the ground. A sharp sword aura suddenly rushed out from his body. Sword of Destruction! He shouted in a low voice. With an ear-piercing sword cry, the surging sword aura spilled out. The long saber in the brocade-clothed man's hand suddenly broke with a crack. On the other side, the green-clothed man was in an even worse state. The Ghost Wolf Claw and the Sword of Destruction collided. Flesh and blood flew out from both of his hands, and even his finger bones were exposed in many places. Lin Tian used the yin-yang steps to close in and threw the Shadow Fire Fist, which landed on the two of them. Bang! Bang! The two of them screamed and flew backward, vomiting blood. They fell to the ground and could no longer get up. Lin Tian paused for a moment, and walked towards the brocade-clothed man. What are you doing? The brocade-clothed man's face changed greatly. Lin Tian said with a mocking expression. What do you think? Do you think I'll treat you to a meal? The brocade-clothed man's face suddenly became incomparably livid. He used this sentence to ridicule Lin Tian before, but now, Lin Tian returned it to him word for word. This was like a fierce slap to his face. Lin Tianling snorted, raised his right leg, and fiercely stomped on the brocade-clothed man's right wrist. Suddenly, the sound of bones shattering was heard. Ah! The brocade-clothed man screamed. His right hand was crippled by Lin Tian. Lin Tian's face was indifferent. He raised his right leg and broke the brocade-clothed man's left arm. After that, he did not stop. He kicked again and broke the brocade-clothed man's left knee, crippling the man's left leg. You said you wanted to break my two hands? Courtesy demands reciprocity. Naturally, I have to be more considerate, Lin Tiantan said indifferently. The brocade-clothed man was in great pain. After hearing Lin Tian's words, he directly spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted on the spot. Lin Tian's face was indifferent. He snorted and walked towards the cyan-clothed man. You, how can you be so vicious? The cyan-clothed man shouted. Seeing Lin Tianyi walk over step by step, his face was full of fear. Vicious? Lin Tian seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world. The two of you came here and wanted to break my hands. At that time, did you think of the word vicious? You. The cyan-clothed man's words stopped, and his face suddenly became very ugly. Chapter 22. Oh, I have something to tell everyone. I have made some changes from Chapter 20 to Chapter 22. Everyone can go back and take a look. The overall direction has not changed, but the plot has been slightly adjusted. In addition, the azure-clothed man in Chapter 22 has been changed to a blue-clothed youth. Only the color of his clothes has been changed because I feel that the words azure-clothed youth are a bit awkward to pronounce. So, I apologize here for causing trouble for everyone. Some people were like this. When they were torturing others, they felt very excited and had a sense of accomplishment. However, when the situation was reversed, they felt that it was too cruel. Lin Tian obviously would not show mercy to such people. You don't mess around. If you treat us like this, young Master Zhou will not let you go, the blue-clothed youth said with a trembling voice. Lin Tian said with disdain. You speak as if he will let me go if I don't hurt you. He lifted his right leg and mercilessly stepped on the blue-clothed youth's arm. Ah! The blue-clothed youth screamed miserably. His face was twisted in pain. Lin Tian was expressionless as he stepped on the blue-clothed youth's other arm. Ah! The screams continued. Like the man in embroidered clothes, the blue-clothed youth's arms and left leg were crippled. Damn it! Damn it! Young Master Zhou will avenge us! He will definitely kill you! The blue-clothed youth roared crazily. His arms and left leg were crippled. He did not know how many elixirs and herbs he would need to use to recover. Is that so? Then I really have to congratulate you. I was scared by your words. Lin Tian glanced at the blue-clothed youth. He lifted his leg again and ruthlessly stepped on the blue-clothed youth's right leg. So, this is your reward. With a crack, the blue-clothed youth's last leg was broken. Ah! The blue-clothed youth screamed miserably. This time, the pain was so painful that he fainted. Lin Tiantan glanced at this person indifferently and turned to leave. It wasn't that he wanted to let it go, but the 9 Yang martial house prohibited disciples from killing each other. These two people came with the intention of crippling his arms and legs. Now that he had crippled their arms and legs, even if the martial house questioned him, he would still be in the right. However, if he killed these two people here, it would be difficult for him to escape the martial house's punishment. When Lin Tian returned home, the sky was completely dark. Sushu was playing with Lin Shi. Brother! Seeing that Lin Tian had returned, Lin Shi immediately went to greet her happily. Lin Tian smiled and rubbed the little girl's head affectionately. Thanks. He looked at Sushu and said. It was already so late, but Sushu was still here with Lin Shi, which made him very grateful. Why are you thanking me? Don't mention it. Sushu shook her head, blinked her eyes and said, That's right, how's your martial skill cultivation, especially that shocking wind sword art, to what extent have you cultivated it? Lin Tian scratched the back of his head and said with a smile. It's okay. Sushu puffed up her cheeks. What do you mean it's okay? How far have you cultivated it? Just say it, I won't make fun of you. After thinking for a while, she said, However, with your martial Dao talent, you should be many times stronger than the average person. At least you have comprehended 20% of the shocking wind sword art's first move. Seeing Lin Tian scratching the back of his head, Sushu thought that Lin Tian's cultivation was not smooth, so he was embarrassed to speak. What? Say it, Sushu said angrily. Lin Tian blushed with shame. This girl was like a little tiger when she was fierce. The Shadow Fist of the Shadow Fire Fist has been cultivated to perfection, and the Shocking Wind Sword Art's first move has been cultivated to perfection, he said. The Shadow Fist of the Shadow Fire Fist has been cultivated to perfection, and the Shocking Wind Sword Art's first move has been cultivated to perfection. And it's already very good. Sushu nodded. Suddenly, her face changed. What did you say? The Shocking Wind Sword Art's first move has been cultivated to perfection? She stared at Lin Tian with her eyes wide open. What kind of joke is this? That 6-star genius in the Martial House also took 20 days to cultivate the first move to perfection. Even if you are a 9-star genius, it can't be so exaggerated, right? How can you cultivate the first move to perfection in a few hours? Forget about the Shadow Fire Fist, but the Shocking Wind Sword Art was famous for being difficult to cultivate. Even her master was somewhat helpless when facing this sword art. But Lin Tian, on the other hand, cultivated the first move to perfection in a few hours, which made her feel incredulous. Seeing Sushu's expression of disbelief, Lin Tian's aura changed, and a sharp sword intent suddenly spread out. Sushu was moved again. The sword intent that Lin Tian displayed at this moment was indeed the manifestation of the Shocking Wind Sword Art's first move to perfection. Sushu was very clear about this because her master, Mu Qing, had once displayed this move for her. He actually, really cultivated it to perfection, she muttered. Lin Tian dispersed the sword intent, shrugged, and said, Of course it's true, why would I lie to you? Sushu stared at Lin Tian, and after a long while, she squeezed out 2 words from between her teeth. Abnormal! Cultivating the first move of the Shocking Wind Sword Art to perfection in a few hours, this was simply a monster among monsters. Lin Tian was speechless, and said, Please don't say it like that, there are many meanings of abnormal, especially when these 2 words come out from a girl's mouth, it's very easy to misunderstand. Sushu was slightly stunned, but in the next second, she reacted, and her beautiful face suddenly became red. Rogue! Fiercely kicking Lin Tian's foot, Sushu angrily ran away. Lin Tian smiled, this naughty and narcissistic girl actually knew how to be shy. It was already late at night. Lin Tian closed the door, and accompanied Lin Shi to talk for a while. He told Lin Shi a few stories about his hometown, which made the little girl giggle, and soon fell asleep. Dotingly looking at his little sister who was sleeping soundly, Lin Tian carefully closed the door and left. He came to the top of the pavilion, took a deep breath, and began to cultivate the 4 extremes scripture. The 4 extremes scripture was very mysterious. It could attract the power of the stars to refine his body, so every night, he would cultivate the 4 extremes scripture. 1. Faint silver light poured down, entering Lin Tian's body. Lin Tianyi repeatedly operated the 4 extremes scripture, using the true yuan to guide the starlight into his bones, repeatedly refining them. This process was very painful, but after the previous experience, Lin Tian had already mentally prepared himself, so he didn't mind. Very quickly an hour passed. The starlight falling from the sky became thin. Lin Tian opened his eyes, moved his body, and stood up. Sushu was right. After the 5th layer of body refinement, the difficulty of cultivation really increased a lot. Lin Tian said to himself. The body refinement realm was divided into 9 layers, and the 5th layer was the dividing point. Simply put, the difficulty of cultivating from the 5th layer to the 9th layer of body refinement was far greater than that from the 1st layer to the 5th layer of body refinement. This was also the reason why once a martial artist reached the 5th layer of body refinement, they must have a cultivation method to continue advancing. In 3 months, I will have to fight with the 9th layer of body refinement Zhou Hao, but according to my current cultivation speed, in 3 months, I will not be able to reach the 9th layer of body refinement realm. Even the 8th layer of body refinement realm would be difficult. Lin Tian frowned. A 9-star talent was very monstrous, but no matter how monstrous it was, it still needed time to cultivate. If there wasn't enough time, how could one become strong? One had to know that the later layers of body refinement realm were not as easy to cultivate as the first 5 layers. 3 months of time did not sound short, but he still needed to rest, he still needed to spend time practicing his martial skills, and sometimes he even needed to attend classes. In this way, there was not much time to cultivate in these 3 months. Thinking of this, Lin Tian could not help but fall into deep thought. How could he quickly become strong? In this loft, Lin Tian thought bitterly for half an hour, but still did not have any clues, and finally could only give up. Forget it, when the boat reaches the bridge, it will naturally straighten out. Let's rest first. He shook his head. The next morning, Lin Tian woke up early, facing the morning sun and breathing. The plan of the day is in the morning. Lin Tian, who had lived 2 lives, was very clear on this principle. For ordinary people, the morning air was very clear, and breathing more of the morning air was good for health and could slow down aging. For martial artists, the spirit energy of heaven and earth was richer in the morning, which was very beneficial for cultivation. After an hour of breathing, Lin Tian felt that his essence, energy, and spirit had become slightly stronger. All right, he muttered to himself, and walked towards the lecture area of the Nine-Yang Martial House. Today was the first day of lectures in the Nine-Yang Martial House since the beginning of this year's enrollment. It could be considered as an official start. Lin Tian felt that it was better to attend today's lecture. Moreover, he did not have much understanding of the path of cultivation, so it was necessary to occasionally listen to the martial house's instructor's insights. When he arrived at the lecture area, there were already many people sitting in the lecture hall. There were about 200 people. Not only were there new disciples, but there were also some old disciples. Lin Tian did not mind and casually found a seat to sit down. The lecture hall of the Nine-Yang Martial House was very big, and because there were many people, it was a bit noisy. Lin Tian closed his eyes and sat in an inconspicuous corner, quietly waiting for the instructors to arrive. At the same time, he was thinking about how to cultivate. 3 months of time included cultivation, rest, and practicing martial skills. In the end, he had to reach the 8th layer of body refinement before he could fight with Zhou Hao. This was a big problem. After about half an hour, the lecture hall suddenly quieted down. "The instructor is here," a voice said. Lin Tian raised his head and saw an old man with a white beard walk in. He was wearing a gray robe. Lin Tian felt a little and found that the old man's cultivation was much lower than Mu Qing and Sherdong's. He was probably at the early stage of the divine pulse realm. The old man coughed twice and slowly said, "For the next year, I will be in charge of teaching you. I will only talk about theories, insights, and some cultivation techniques. Of course, I will also talk about things outside of traditional martial arts." When the old man finished speaking, some of the new disciples were puzzled. "Things outside of traditional martial arts? What is that?" someone whispered. In the last row of the lecture hall, a courageous disciple stood up and said, "Instructor, what do you mean by things outside of traditional martial arts? Can you tell us?" This was a young man with a strong build. Although he was bold, he was very polite. There was a lot of discussion in the lecture hall. Lin Tian couldn't help but be curious. Everyone who stepped on the road of cultivation knew about traditional martial arts. It referred to simple cultivation techniques, and martial skills. This was traditional martial arts cultivation. Few people knew about things outside of traditional martial arts. Now that they suddenly heard the old man say such a sentence, most of the people here were curious. Seeing that most of the disciples were staring at him, the old man nodded and said, "Well, I should have talked about the cultivation techniques of traditional martial arts first. But since you want to know about things outside of traditional martial arts, there is no other way," the old man said, and slowly took out a thin book from his arms and said, "Look here." The book in the old man's hand was very old. The pages were yellow and there were many strange patterns drawn on it. "What is this?" Many people were puzzled. Lin Tian also looked at the thin book in the old man's hand. Looking at the strange patterns on the pages, his face suddenly changed slightly. "That is? P.S. Thank you for the 10,000 support of the Chrysanthemum Remnant Brothers. Thank you. Chapter 23. This was not the first time Lin Tian had seen the strange patterns on the thin book the old man had taken out. Not long ago, when the iron sword entered his body, many things appeared in his mind, and among them were the existence of similar patterns. These patterns are. Lin Tian was a little surprised. Like him, the other disciples in the lecture hall were also puzzled. The elder closed the book and slowly said, "These are array patterns." Array patterns? Someone was puzzled. Array patterns are the result of countless years of research by array manipulators, and the so-called array manipulators are outside of the traditional martial arts. The elder continued, "Array manipulators can use their true yuan and some special materials to create martial arts scrolls that ordinary people can use. They can also inscribe spirit-gathering array patterns to increase a martial artist's cultivation speed. They can also inscribe spirit-gathering array patterns on weapons to increase the power of weapons. Legend has it that the best array manipulators can even use the power of heaven and earth to inscribe killing patterns in the void. It is extremely terrifying." Wow! As the elder's words fell, everyone in the lecture hall was shocked. Array manipulators? That's too powerful. In the corner, Lin Tianwei was shocked and finally understood. So, the strange patterns that appeared in my mind are actually array patterns, the stuff of array manipulators. Lin Tian muttered to himself. Suddenly his eyes lit up. The elder had said many things related to array manipulators, and the one that attracted him the most was undoubtedly the fact that array manipulators could inscribe spirit-gathering arrays to increase a martial artist's cultivation speed. One should know, he was now facing the problem of how to increase his cultivation speed. "Instructor, I want to become an array manipulator, can you teach me?" "Me too." "Instructor, I want to learn the art of array manipulation too." "I want to learn too." In the lecture hall, most of the disciples were excited. The elder smiled and shook his head. He gestured with his hands, indicating for everyone to quiet down. Array manipulators have a very high status in Northern Flame Country, and are the target of all the major forces. Once you become a qualified array manipulator, money, wealth, and power are all a piece of cake. The elder said. Unfortunately, the requirements to become an array manipulator are too harsh. It is not something that ordinary people can achieve. Hearing this, many people were stunned. "Instructor, what requirements do we need to meet to become an array manipulator?" a disciple asked. In the corner, Lin Tian also pricked up his ears. This so-called array-controlling master was perhaps the only opportunity for him to reach the 9th layer of body refinement within 3 months, so he naturally had to listen attentively. The old man said, "If you want to become a matrix manipulator, you have to fulfill at least 2 conditions. First, you have to have an extraordinarily powerful soul. Second, you have to have a powerful matrix manipulator as a guide to pass down the array patterns." At this point, the old man shook his head and continued. "Within the Northern Flame Kingdom, the number of people who can reach the level of array manipulator is so rare that 1 in 10,000 is less than 1 in 10,000. Furthermore, array manipulators almost never pass on array inscriptions to outsiders. Thus, it is extremely difficult to become an array manipulator." The old man spat out the word difficult 3 times in a row, causing many people to be stunned. "Let's not talk about soul power for now. Instructor, don't you have a rune in your hand?" a disciple whispered. Hearing this, many people looked at the old man. The old man waved the book in his hand and said, "These patterns were just casually drawn by a few array manipulators. Then, they were imprinted by some people who didn't understand them. They don't have any charm. There's no value in studying them." "I see." Many disciples were disappointed. Seeing these people's reaction, the old man smiled and said, "You don't have to be so disappointed. If you want to become a qualified matrix manipulator, other than the first 2 conditions, you also need a lot of money. This is because when a matrix manipulator practices carving inscriptions, it requires a lot of precious materials. Normal people can't afford it." Of course, once you become a qualified matrix manipulator, you can make some martial skill scrolls and sell them for a good price. It's easy to make money. Hearing the old man's words, the disciples looked forward to becoming a matrix manipulator even more. Of course, they were even more disappointed because the conditions to become a matrix manipulator were too harsh. No matter what it was shockingly difficult. It was enough to make people despair. Alright, don't think too much about it. Practicing martial arts is the right way to go, the old man said. Many people smiled embarrassedly and quieted down. For them, becoming a matrix manipulator was too far away. They started to listen to the old man's explanation about traditional martial arts. In the corner, Lin Tian clenched his fists. His eyes flashed. Matrix manipulator, so that's how it is. This class lasted for a total of 2 hours. After 2 hours, the old man announced the end of the class. Lin Tian immediately walked out of the lecture hall and headed back to his residence in the martial house. After returning to his residence, he directly closed himself in and began to browse through the mysterious inscriptions that had appeared in his mind not long ago. In 3 months, when he fought with Zhou Hao, he needed to at least reach the 8th rank of body refinement. There was not enough time. If he became a matrix manipulator, he could increase his cultivation speed by carving spirit-gathering arrays. This was undoubtedly what he needed the most right now. There was another point. A martial artist's cultivation required a lot of resources, such as pills and artifacts. If he could become a matrix manipulator, he would be able to earn a lot of money. Naturally, he would be able to buy high-quality pills and artifacts. Therefore, no matter what, he had to become a matrix manipulator. Closing his eyes, Lin Tian began to fuse the strange inscriptions in his mind. In an instant, lines of divine inscriptions flashed, mixed with a profound charm. It was as if sharp blades were slicing at his head. It was so painful that he almost screamed out loud. This process lasted for a total of 6 hours. It was only in the afternoon that Lin Tian opened his eyes. It hurts so much! He held his head, feeling that his vision was blurred. His head was splitting. But even so, Lin Tian was still very excited. After fusing the strange inscriptions in his mind, he found many inscriptions. Among them, there was the spirit-gathering array that the old man had mentioned. Most importantly, the spirit-gathering array was only the most basic of all inscriptions. Spirit-gathering array, martial fusion array, strength array, trap array, illusion array, killing array, Lin Tian mumbled to himself. He rubbed his head and shook it violently. There were simply too many divine runes gushing into his mind. From the most basic spirit-gathering rune to the most advanced killing rune, each and every rune stacked together in his mind. Under his deliberate attempt to merge them all together, it felt like his head was about to explode. After another 2 hours, Lin Tian finally felt better. After 8 hours, Lin Tian had a rough understanding of how to cultivate as a matrix manipulator. As for the requirements to become a matrix manipulator, Lin Tian knew that his soul force had already met the requirements. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to sort out the inscriptions in his mind. And on those inscriptions, he could clearly sense a vast amount of divine essence. He could definitely use it to comprehend them. The first step to cultivating as a matrix manipulator was to create scrolls. Scrolls were usually made with parchment paper. This step was relatively simple. After that, it would be the second step. This step was to buy materials and use them to create the ink used to inscribe the inscriptions. The ink could be obtained by grinding medicinal herbs. Sometimes, it would also require the blood of some high-grade demonic beasts. After creating the scrolls in ink, one could use their true essence to inscribe the inscriptions onto the scrolls and create some finished products. This step was the final step and also the most difficult one. Normally, for a matrix manipulator who had just started cultivating, it was already considered not bad if they could succeed in creating 1 out of 10 scrolls. Other than the third step, the second step was also extremely easy to fail. And once one failed, the materials would be wasted, and so would the money. It was also because of this that the cultivation of a matrix manipulator was extremely costly. Ordinary people would find it hard to support the expenditure of materials and money during the cultivation process. Let's take a look at the spirit gathering array first. Lin Tian was slightly agitated. He scanned through the materials needed to create the spirit gathering array and subconsciously recited: Soul Tooth Grass, Golden Armor Root, 3rd Grade Demonic Beast Spirit Fire Ape's Blood, these materials. Gradually, Lin Tian couldn't help but smile bitterly. Putting aside the Soul Tooth Grass and Golden Armor Root, he could still afford them. However, the blood of the Class 3 Demonic Beast, Spirit Fire Ape, and the other 2 materials were frighteningly expensive. Each of them would cost him dozens of spirit coins. After calculating, he would have to spend 100 spirit coins to make a spirit gathering array scroll. Taking into account the possibility of failure, he would have to spend at least 1,000 spirit coins to buy the materials. Only then would he be able to barely make a spirit gathering array scroll. This is too expensive! Spirit coins were the common currency of the Northern Flame country. It was said that they were made from the residue of some kind of origin spirit mine. For an ordinary person, 1 spirit coin was enough to maintain their normal livelihood for a month. Lin Tian counted. He only had about 30 spirit coins on him. He couldn't even afford the materials needed to create a spirit gathering array. Thinking of this, Lin Tian suddenly felt a headache coming on. Looks like I can only borrow money, Lin Tian said helplessly. What? 1,000 spirit coins? What do you need so much money for? Sushu stared at Lin Tian. 1,000 spirit coins, even for a direct disciple of a martial house elder like her, was a large sum of money. To buy something, Lin Tian said embarrassedly. In the 9 Sun martial house, the only people he was familiar with were Sushu, Mu Qing, and Shudong. The latter 2 were martial house elders. How could he have the nerve to borrow money from an elder? After thinking about it, he could only ask Sushu for help. Speaking of which, this was the first time he borrowed money from a girl in his 2 lives. What do you need to buy that you need so much money? Sushu asked. Lin Tian scratched the back of his head and said, This is a secret. I can't tell you for now. Secret? Sushu stared at Lin Tian and suddenly puffed up her cheeks. Lin Tianyi was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Sushu snorted. In the end, she didn't make things difficult for Lin Tian and gave Lin Tianyi 1,000 spirit coins. Thank you. I will return the money to you as soon as possible, Lin Tian promised. Chapter 24. The E-Treasure Pavilion was the biggest place to sell materials in Fengjian City. At the same time, it was also the only auction house in Fengjian City. Ordinary elixirs, immortal herbs, and artifacts could be obtained from the E-Treasure Pavilion. Of course, the prerequisite was that one had enough spirit coins. The E-Treasure Pavilion had existed in Fengjian City for a very long time. It had appeared almost at the same time as the Nine-Yang Martial House. There were rumors that the E-Treasure Pavilion was supported by a mysterious big family that had some connections with the imperial family. It was also because of this that no one in Fengjian City dared to have any ideas about the Yi-Bao Pavilion, even though the profits of the Yi-Bao Pavilion were astonishing. Some powerful cultivators were also willing to cooperate with the Yi-Bao Pavilion. Whenever they needed something, they would often come to the Yi-Bao Pavilion to purchase it. If there was something that they didn't need for the time being, they would hand it over to the Yi-Bao Pavilion to auction. Of course, after that, the Yi-Bao Pavilion would collect 30% of the auction price as a reward. Lin Tian walked on the streets of Fengjian City. The huge black robe covered his face, but it still made his body look slender. The current Lin Tian, even if Lin Shi came, it would still be difficult for him to recognize him. It's very safe, Lin Tian thought to himself. It was no wonder that he was so careful. He had killed the Mosin, and the Mo clan was a famous martial artist family in Fengjian City. Although it was far from being comparable to the Nine-Yang martial house, it was still a huge force to him. For the sake of safety, Lin Tian had to be careful. Soon, Lin Tian arrived in front of the E-Treasure Pavilion. He raised his head and looked around. The E-Treasure Pavilion was extremely luxurious, giving off a feeling of a jade palace. Standing in front of it, one couldn't help but feel small. There were a few powerful guards standing guard in front of the E-Treasure Pavilion. Under the watchful eyes of these guards, Lin Tian walked into the E-Treasure Pavilion. The interior of the E-Treasure Pavilion was very spacious. Just like the exterior, the interior of the E-Treasure Pavilion was also dazzling and magnificent. So luxurious! Lin Tian was secretly shocked. The E-Bao Pavilion was divided into two sections. One section was for the sale of precious weapons, dawn, and materials. The other section was for the auction of rare treasures. Lin Tian stood in the middle of the E-Bao Pavilion and casually looked in the direction of the auction. He found that there were many people there, and all of them were wearing bright clothes. Obviously, they were all very rich. Lin Tian shook his head and turned to walk away. Right at this moment, a voice sounded from the direction of the auction hall. A formation-controlling master has delivered a martial fusion rune scroll of a middle-grade body refinement martial skill. Tell the auctioneer, now! Right away! Lin Tian's footsteps paused. He couldn't help but turn around and look again. After absorbing some of the information in his mind, Lin Tian knew what a martial fusion rune scroll was. This martial fusion rune scroll was a scroll created by an array manipulator after they had drawn a fusion rune and merged the power of their martial skills into the rune. It was the so-called martial fusion rune scroll. Even an ordinary person would be able to display powerful martial skills while holding such a scroll. Of course, each martial fusion rune scroll could only be used once. Lin Tian came here to buy materials to cultivate as an array manipulator. Now that he suddenly heard something related to array manipulators, he naturally paid attention. A martial fusion rune scroll of a middle-grade body refinement martial skill? In the direction of the auction hall, the person in charge of the E-Bao Pavilion was moved when he heard this. He immediately walked towards the second floor of the E-Bao Pavilion. At the same time, some people who came and went revealed shocked expressions. Many people became excited and quickly walked into the auction hall. Obviously, this was all related to the martial fusion rune scroll. Seeing such a scene, Lin Tian was a little surprised. The items made by array manipulators were so sought after? He was startled on the spot, and then shook his head. Let's buy materials first. Originally, Lin Tian wanted to go to the auction hall to take a look. However, to enter the auction hall, the entrance fee was 50 spirit coins. With his current financial situation, 50 spirit coins entrance fee was a little exaggerated. After a slight pause, he walked towards the materials sales area of the E-Bao Pavilion. Hello, may I ask what you need? A beautiful woman greeted him. Because Lin Tian wanted to cultivate as an array manipulator, the materials he needed to purchase were more expensive. The places that sold these expensive materials were usually greeted by a receptionist. Looking at Lin Tian's slightly strange attire, the receptionist frowned slightly. However, she quickly put on a professional smile. There were many people coming and going in the E-Bao Pavilion every day. It was not the first time she saw someone with such a special attire. Lin Tian now said, "Give me 10 sets of each of these things." As he spoke, he handed over a list. Before coming to the E-Bao Pavilion, he had already listed out the things he needed. The receptionist took the list and subconsciously read it out. Parchment, soul-tooth grass, blood of the third-grade demonic beast, spirit fire ape, frost-breaking stone. When she read this, the receptionist revealed a surprised expression. Her expression changed slightly as she looked at Lin Tian with a touch of respect. "You're an array manipulator? You know about array manipulators?" The receptionist said politely. "I don't know much about it. It's just that the auction house over there has auctioned a few array manipulator works, so I know a little bit about them." "I see." Lin Tian's heart moved as he asked. "When I came here just now, the auction house seemed to have received a middle-grade body refinement level martial fusion pattern scroll. If it were to be auctioned, how much would the final auction price be?" It was said that array manipulators earn money as easily as drinking water and eating. He wanted to know more. A middle-grade body refinement level Martial fusion pattern scroll? The receptionist was a little surprised, but she quickly readjusted her attitude and said, "A middle-grade body refinement level Martial fusion pattern scroll was auctioned once before. At that time, the transaction price was about 3,000 spirit coins." Hearing this price, Lin Tian was shocked. 3,000 spirit coins? This was simply daylight robbery. However, after being surprised, Lin Tian couldn't help but become excited. The works of an array manipulator were actually so expensive. If he could successfully become an array manipulator, wouldn't spirit coins roll in? At that time, artifacts, elixirs, and so on would no longer be a problem. Taking a deep breath, Lin Tian now said, "All right, how about this? I don't need the materials just now for the time being. I'll make a change. Help me prepare these things. Parchment, leaf flower root scripture, level 2 black demon wolf's bone marrow, spirit fragrance sulfur." Lin Tian originally planned to directly create the spirit gathering pattern, but at this moment, he suddenly changed his mind. Although the spirit gathering pattern and the martial fusion pattern were the most basic formation patterns, the spirit gathering pattern was of a higher level than the martial fusion pattern. The materials required were also slightly more precious, and the difficulty of inscribing them was naturally higher. After comprehensive consideration, Lin Tian planned to first create a martial fusion pattern scroll and then auction the finished product at the E-Treasure Pavilion. After that, he would have the money to repay Sushu and could also keep the money to continue purchasing materials for creating the spirit gathering pattern. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. It was the best choice at the moment. "All right, please wait a moment," the receptionist said enthusiastically. By the time he returned to the Nine-Yang Martial House from the E-Treasure Pavilion, the sky had already turned slightly dark. Carrying 2 heavy bags of materials, Lin Tian went straight back to his residence and carefully placed the purchased materials in the top pavilion. 1,000 spirit coins, and more than 800 were gone in an instant. The cultivation of an array controller is really burning money. Lin Tian felt a little helpless. However, when he thought of the earning ability of an array controller, the helplessness on his face instantly disappeared and was replaced with excitement. Huff. After taking a deep breath, Lin Tian began to organize the materials he had bought. Lin Tian planned for a while. He planned to cultivate the array controller technique to the small success stage within 15 days. Then, he would rely on the array controller technique to create the martial fusion pattern scroll and auction it off. He would then use the spirit coins he earned to purchase materials to inscribe the spirit gathering pattern scroll for cultivation. While cultivating, he would also continue to create the array pattern scroll and use it to exchange for elixirs, immortal herbs, artifacts, and so on. In this way, Lin Tian had full confidence that he could step into the 8th level of the refinement realm in 3 months' time. Even reaching the 9th level of the refinement realm was not impossible. Soon, Lin Tian sorted out the purchased materials and put them away again. "Begin," Lin Tian said to himself. He could not wait to start practicing. After fusing the array pattern in his mind, he already knew how to cultivate as an array controller. The first step was to take out the parchment paper and begin to create the initial scrolls. This step was relatively simple, and most people could create it. Therefore, Lin Tian quickly completed the first step and created 9 initial scrolls. Looking at the completed initial scrolls, Lin Tian revealed a smile. Although the first step was simple, no matter what, these things were made by him personally. It was as if they were his own children. Naturally, he would be excited. This was just like cooking. No matter how bland the dish was, as long as it was made by him, he would eat it with relish. After calming down a little, Lin Tian began the second step. The second step was to create the yen ink. The so-called yen ink referred to the special ink used to inscribe array patterns. Array manipulators would mix some precious materials together with the blood and bone marrow of demonic beasts, and then use their true yuan to adjust and grind it, finally obtaining this kind of yen ink. With the initial scrolls and the yen ink, Array controllers could imprint the array pattern onto the initial scrolls and create the final product. Lin Tian operated the 4 extreme scriptures. After mobilizing the true yuan in his body, his aura suddenly changed. He began to operate another technique, the One Sky Soul technique. This technique was obtained when he was fusing the array pattern. It was specifically used for the cultivation of the soul. It was also a technique that array controllers had to use to control arrays. Gently raising his hand, Lin Tian took out a portion of the leaf flower root scripture and spirit soaring sulfur. Using his soul power as a guide, he wrapped the 2 materials. Then, he poured his true yuan into them and crushed the 2 materials. He began to absorb the juice produced after they were crushed. After that, he merged the juice with the bone marrow of the 2nd-level demonic beast, Black Demonic Wolf. His soul power became more turbulent as he began to create the yen ink. Wang! A faint brilliance flickered. In front of Lin Tian's chest, a ball of liquid was mixing and changing shape from time to time. Gradually, Lin Tian's forehead began to sweat. His face also became a little pale. Creating the yen ink was far more difficult than creating the initial scroll. This step was extremely difficult. Chapter 25. The process of making the ink not only consumed soul power and Jin Yuan, but it also consumed a shocking amount of energy. Lin Tian stared at the ball of liquid in front of his chest with all his concentration. He controlled his true yuan and soul force to slowly adjust the liquid in front of his chest. Rumble! The liquid was about the size of a fist. As Lin Tian poured his Jin Yuan and soul power into it, the liquid gradually shrank and some black sticky substance fell out. This sticky substance was the impurities that would be produced when making the ink. It was equivalent to the waste product of refining several materials. Lin Tian carefully poured his Jin Yuan into the liquid while operating the Heavenly One Soul's secret art. He carefully maintained the liquid. During this process, he was using an appropriate ratio of Jin Yuan and soul power to fuse the liquid in front of his chest. This was a very precise process. Even a small mistake could lead to failure. Gradually, the sweat on Lin Tian's forehead became denser. The consumption of his Jin Yuan and soul power was very serious. It was also at this time that the ratio of Jin Yuan and soul power that he poured into the liquid became a little chaotic. Not good! Lin Tian thought to himself. Maintaining the liquid in front of his chest, Lin Tian quickly restored the ratio of Jin Yuan and soul power. Unfortunately, after making a mistake, it was too difficult to restore it. As a result, he made several mistakes in succession. Chi! With a light sound, the liquid in front of his chest shattered and spilled all over the floor. Lin Tianxin's heart was bleeding as he looked at the liquid that splashed on the floor. That was 80 spirit coins. It was enough for an ordinary family to live a stable life for 7 years. But now, 80 spirit coins were gone in an instant in his hands. This made him sigh again. The cultivation of an array controller was really burning money. Who could afford it? Taking a deep breath, Lin Tian closed his eyes and operated the 4 extreme scripture and the Heavenly One Soul's secret art at the same time to restore his Jin Yuan and soul power. At the same time, he recalled the process of making the ink and concluded the reasons for the mistakes. Progress and failure. This was a principle that Lin Tian had learned in his previous life. Therefore, he was not discouraged. The sky had completely darkened, and the curtain of night had enveloped the earth. Lin Tian didn't rest. Relying on the candlesticks he bought, he continued to practice making ink in the pavilion. After summarizing his first failure, Lin Tian's second attempt at making Yen-mo went a little smoother. Unfortunately, it was only a little smoother than the first attempt. This time, he still failed. 160 spirit coins! Lin Tian smiled bitterly. After the second failure, Lin Tian did not continue to use the materials to make the mixture. Instead, he used his mind to deduce the process of Yen-mo's mixture. He repeatedly summarized and corrected the previous 2 failures. Very quickly, an hour had passed. Opening his eyes, Lin Tian's eyes flashed with a bright light. Again, he said in a low voice. The tendons of the 100-leaf grass and the spirit incense sulfur were quickly squeezed into a liquid. Then, he mixed the liquid with the black demonic wolf bone marrow that he had prepared beforehand. He injected his true yuan and soul power at the same time and fused them in a specific ratio. Gradually, drops of black viscous substance dripped onto the ground. Lin Tian was completely focused. He had never been so focused before. He stared at the fist-sized liquid in front of his chest. After summarizing his 2 failures this time, he was exceptionally proficient. Everything proceeded smoothly. After a quarter of an hour, the fist-sized lump of liquid in front of his chest had shrunk to half its original size. It was also at this time that a faint halo of light appeared. "It's done!" Lin Tian was pleasantly surprised. He used his true yuan to control Yen Mo in front of his chest and carefully placed it in the glassware that he had prepared beforehand. Looking at the liquid in the glassware, there was a faint tricolored light flickering with a hint of magical charm. "This is Yen Mo. It's really extraordinary." Lin Tian was slightly excited. The 3rd attempt was finally a success. Putting away his excitement, Lin Tian carefully put away the glassware in which Yen Mo was placed. Then, he began a new round of Yen Mo's mixture. He had purchased a total of 10 sets of materials. Now, he had used up 3 sets. There were still 7 sets waiting for him to refine. Time passed by. Soon, the stars were hidden, and the morning sun shone on the earth. In the top pavilion, Lin Tian wiped the sweat off his forehead. There was a satisfied look on his face. There were 6 glassware in front of him. Each of them contained the same tricolored liquid. They were all Yen Mo. In one night, he had successfully mixed 6 sets of Yen Mo. Phew! Wiping the sweat off his forehead, Lin Tian exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. He carefully put away the 6 glassware. After a whole night of Yen Mo's mixture, Lin Tian was still somewhat sleepy. After putting away the initial scroll and Yen Mo, he walked down from the top pavilion and prepared to rest for a while. Time was precious to him now. He hoped to produce the martial fusion pattern as soon as possible. However, he also knew the principle of more haste, less speed. If he forced himself to practice as a matrix manipulator with tiredness, the failure rate would be extremely high, and a lot of materials would be wasted. After facing the morning sun and breathing for a while, Lin Tian walked into the house and took a nap. He slept for 6 hours. After 6 hours, Lin Tian woke up. He found some food on the wooden table beside his bed. The food was very simple, but there was a faint fragrance. Looking at the food, Lin Tian's eyes became gentle. He was too familiar with the food. With a glance, he knew that it was made by Lin Shi. Thinking about it, when Lin Shi woke him up after cooking, she found that he was sleeping. She felt that he was very tired, so she didn't disturb him. She only put the food beside his bed. Lin Tian chuckled. She was really a considerate little girl. After getting out of bed, Lin Tian quickly digested the food Lin Shi prepared for him. After cleaning up the bowls and chopsticks, he once again went to the top pavilion. He had already completed the first 2 steps of the matrix manipulator practice, making the initial scroll in Yen Mo. Now there was only the last step left. The last step was to use his true essence and soul force to thoroughly understand the runes on the initial scroll with Yen Mo. Then, he would create the finished martial fusion rune. Then, he would integrate the power of the martial skill into it. The strength of the martial skill determined the final value of the martial fusion rune scroll. Simply put, if the power of a low-grade body transformation martial skill was integrated into the martial fusion rune, the final scroll would be a low-grade body transformation martial fusion rune scroll. If the power of a mid-grade body transformation martial skill was integrated, the final scroll would be a mid-grade body transformation martial fusion rune scroll, and so on. Of course, the degree of martial skill power that could be fused into the scroll was also related to the quality of the martial fusion marking that the array controller inscribed. If the quality of the martial fusion marking inscribed was ordinary, the martial skill power that could be fused into the scroll would not be too strong. The value of the finished martial fusion marking martial skill scroll that was created at the end would naturally not be high. Sitting cross-legged in the top pavilion, Lin Tian closed his eyes and searched for the martial fusion rune in his mind. Then, he began to seriously deduce it. He used his mind to comprehend this kind of formation pattern. In his mind, the tiny martial fusion pattern was instantly magnified countless times. Every basic pattern, every arc, every corner, everything became clear. The martial fusion rune was composed of 6 patterns that were connected to each other to form a whole. It was beautiful, but it also had a special charm. Lin Tian's soul force was extremely strong. In addition, the martial fusion rune was the simplest of the basic runes. So, it only took him a day to completely comprehend the rune. Now, it's time for the final carving, Lin Tian muttered to himself. Comprehending the rune didn't mean that he could easily carve it. It wasn't the same thing. Compared to making the initial scroll and refining the NMO, the third step of carving the rune was undoubtedly more difficult. It was dozens of times more difficult than refining the NMO. After resting for a while, Lin Tian didn't directly use the refined NMO and the initial scroll to carve. Instead, he took out simple paper and ink and began to practice drawing the martial fusion rune. The initial scroll was fine, but the NMO was frighteningly expensive. It was also very difficult to make. Lin Tian didn't dare to directly use the NMO to carve the rune. Lin Tian thought that he would first rely on the simple paper and ink to practice carving the martial fusion rune. When he was able to draw the martial fusion rune with ease, he would then proceed to the true final step and use the NMO to carve the rune on the initial scroll. This way, he could at least minimize the failure rate. As soon as he thought of it, Lin Tian mobilized his true essence and soul force and began carving. The carving of the rune didn't use a pen. Instead, it used true essence and soul force as a guide. It relied on the NMO to draw the rune on the initial scroll and turn it into a finished product. Lin Tian bought a thick stack of white paper and ordinary ink. He used his true essence to draw out a blob of ink and poured his soul force into it. He seriously practiced. Time passed day by day. Soon 5 days had passed. During these 5 days, apart from the necessary rest and meals, Lin Tian had been practicing carving the martial fusion rune with ordinary paper and ink. He had used up nearly 1,000 pieces of white paper. Lin Tianyi didn't feel any heartache regarding this. These pieces of white paper only added up to 2 spirit coins. Compared to the cost of purchasing other materials, this was really nothing. On this day, Lin Tian prepared to truly begin the final step. 1. A faint brilliance lingered around his body. Sitting cross-legged in the pavilion, Lin Tian simultaneously circulated the 4 extremes scripture and the Heavenly One Soul's secret art. He only stopped when his true essence and soul force reached the optimal level. Begin! Taking a deep breath, Lin Tian's eyes flashed with a deep light. Opening the initial scroll, Lin Tian's right hand slightly moved. His true essence and soul force circulated at the same time. Suddenly, the NMO in the container beside him all flew out and gathered in his right hand. Looking at the NMO in his hand, Lin Tian seriously recalled the feeling of carving the martial fusion rune with ordinary paper and ink. His right hand slowly lowered. At this moment, various hand seals and formation patterns appeared in his mind. Accompanied by a swishing sound, a Dao pattern as sharp as an eagle's claw appeared on the initial scroll. As Lin Tian's arm moved, it slowly extended. After thousands of ordinary practice, Lin Tian was already very familiar with the carving of the martial fusion rune. Soon, the first basic pattern of the martial fusion rune was completed. At this time, Lin Tian didn't stop what he was doing. He gently flicked his 5 fingers, and the pattern on the initial scroll suddenly changed its angle. A new pattern connected to the first pattern at the same time as it began to appear in another arc and slowly extended. Very good! Lin Tian couldn't help but feel satisfied with his performance. After 5 days of repeated practice, there was finally an effect. Without being careless, Lin Tian concentrated and continued carving the martial fusion rune. After an hour, he had already completed 3/5 of the martial fusion rune, You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.